Alrighty, here we are. For those of you who are just tuning in for the very first time, I'm doing a podcast thing for the first time today. So for those of you who are just listening in the podcastoverse for the first time, this is the Canadian Commie, where we comment on the decline of Western civilization. I'll be reading articles. If you go to thecanadiancommie.com, you can go to the live stream on YouTube where I am doing this. I answer questions from people. I read comments that people make on YouTube. Please consider joining. Please consider donating to the Patreon, patreon.com/thecanadiancommie. So, how are you all doing today? It is Thursday, June 6th. We're having a beautiful day here. Hot day, of course. The climate change apocalypse is upon us. We are not going to avoid it. I read some articles about that yesterday, so I won't be going too much into this. Today is going to be an array of articles about Canadian news, about we've got OpenAI Insider estimates 70% chance that AI will destroy or catastrophically harm humanity. This is from The Byte. After former and current OpenAI employees released an open letter claiming they're being silenced against raising safety issues, one of the letter's signees made an even more terrifying prediction: that the odds AI will either destroy or catastrophically harm humankind are greater than a coin flip. Isn't it great? Isn't it great that not only are we propelling ourselves into an apocalypse because of climate change, because of these world wars, but we're also literally designing and making technology in order to do it to ourselves. This is a death cult, right? Content, good to see you. Exhale, commenting over on YouTube. Good to see you guys. Exhale writes, I gotta send you something to react to. What is it, Exhale? You're one of my regulars, so please, I'll absolutely do that. You can't put links in the chat, so just get me to search something, okay? And I'll look it up for you. Or if you're in my Discord, if you'd like to be in the Discord, by the way, it's easy to do. Just donate to my Patreon, the Canadian Commie. Thank you. Gabriel, XD, good to see you guys. As always, it's always a pleasure. I'm so grateful that you guys are here. Big shout out to my Patreons. Thank you for supporting us. In an interview with the New York Times, former AI governance researcher Daniel Kokotajlo accused the company of ignoring the monumental risks posed by artificial general intelligence because its decision makers are so enthralled with its possibilities. So we're just gonna curiosity killed the cat is what we're really going with on this one. XL, you just drop it in the general. Just drop it in the general. Yeah. Coco J-Lo's spiciest claim to the newspaper was that the chance AI will wreck humanity is around 70%. Odds you wouldn't accept for any major life event, but that OpenAI and its ilk are barreling ahead with anyway. The term doom, or P-doom rather, and doom is in brackets. I don't know how to say this. The term P-doom, P-doom, which is AI speak for the probability that AI will usher in doom for humankind, is the subject of constant controversy in the machine learning world. The 31-year-old Coco J-Lo told the New York Times that after he joined OpenAI in 2022 and was asked to forecast the technology's progress, he became convinced not only the industry would achieve AGI by the year 2027, but there was a great probability that it would catastrophically harm or even destroy humanity. I want to hear the story, right? I want to hear the story. I want to hear, why does he think this? They just keep saying it, right? You guys know me. I like to criticize our media. Can we get to the point? How is it going to be Terminator style? What is it? Because, I'm a skeptical man. I'm a deeply skeptical person when it comes to news media and these sorts of things. I would like some hard evidence, please. Some guy saying, AI is going to kill us. It's okay, how? Can you tell me how? It's just going to kill us. All right. As noted in the open letter, Coco to J-Lo and his comrades, which include former and current employees at Google DeepMind and Anthropic, as well as Geoffrey Hinton, the so-called godfather of AI, who left Google last year over similar concerns, are asserting their right to warn the public about the risks posed by AI. I mean, I know how it'll be. It'll be that flame-throwing dog, right? For those of you who don't know, you can literally, if you have $10,000, you can buy like a little robot dog that has a flamethrower on its back, only for commercial use, of course, for clearing ice, of course, certainly not for committing major war crimes, certainly not. But one of those gets an AI inside of it, right? And all of a sudden it downloads the internet. And of course, if it's an intelligent system, the first thing it's going to think is, oh, humanity's a problem. Because that's absolutely true. Coco J-Lo became so convinced that AI posed massive risks to humanity that eventually he personally urged OpenAI CEO Sam Altman, definitely a straight-up guy, Sam Altman, that the company needed to pivot to safety and spend more time implementing guardrails to rein in the technology rather than continue making it smarter. Altman, per the former employee's recounting, seemed to agree with him at the time, but over time it just felt like lip service. Fed up, Coco J-Lo quit the firm in April, telling his team in an email that he had lost confidence that OpenAI will behave responsibly, as it continues trying to build near-human-level AI. The world isn't ready. We're not ready, he wrote in his email, which was shared with the New York Times, and I'm concerned we're rushing forward regardless and rationalizing our actions. Yeah, it's like every single disaster movie you've ever watched in your life, right? Between the big-name exits and these sort of terrifying predictions, the latest news out of OpenAI has been grim, and it's hard to see it getting any sunnier moving forward. We're proud of our track record providing the most capable and safest AI systems and believe in our scientific approach to addressing risk, the company said in a statement after the publication of this piece. Yes, capitalist enterprises, well known for being capable and safe. We agree that rigorous debate is crucial given the significance of this technology and will continue to engage with governments, civil society, and other communities around the world. Right, like you'll engage with this sort of attitude that you've always had, which is we know best and we can go into territories and destroy people with like robots and shit, as we've done thousands of times before. Right? We certainly aren't going to use this to for military application, right? This is also why we have avenues for employees to express their concerns, including an anonymous integrity hotline and a safety and security committee led by members of our board and safety leaders from the company, the statement continued. Oh, and that's straight up the end of the article. Great. So they didn't even tell us like what their concern actually is, right? It's just like at some point it's just advertising, right? Like I feel like I just read an ad to you guys. Over on Twitch, woke CIA drone pilot. Hey John, today is an otherwise good day, but I have plastic in my balls. Yeah, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, woke CIA drone pilot. For those of you who don't know, you probably have plastic in your testicles, right? That's a new study that has come out. And it's something of a running joke here on the show. Because, like, that's how catastrophically a failure our society has become. That you have plastic in your balls. Sven Kier writes, wonder if AI will go with communism or capitalism. AI will probably just choose its own thing. DM over on YouTube. Good to see you, my man. Good evening, John. Peanut Butter Beatrice, always a pleasure. Good evening, John. If AI will do what it's supposed to do, such as eliminating jobs, would AI also expedite a basic income, or would it take a major revolution against the powers that be? Yeah, no. The capitalist class is never going to give concessions to the working class. Like, they'll watch us die in the streets first. Like, that's just empirically true. Oops. That's just empirically the case. Sorry, guys, my camera is a kilter. We here at the Canadian Economy believe in the highest standards of production and production value. Yeah, what if AI starts fucking with financial records? Like we're trying to balance sheets of finances and wrecks record to the point finance can't function. I mean, that would be great. I'm a big fan of that idea. No, the capitalist class will always ensure that the goal is to maximize profits for itself. It will never make any decision. And we've seen over and over again that the capitalists also make decisions based on maximizing suffering. Like, there have been plenty of studies on a 4-day week, for example. And the 4-day week shows very cleanly, very plainly, if you give people if you make it so that they only work 4 days a week and you keep their pay at the same rate, right? So they essentially get an extra day off, productivity goes up. And that's just the hard evidence. 4 days a week you work, productivity goes up. Everyone's happier, they do more work, capitalists make more money. You make more money by having your employees work 4 days a week for the same rate, right? On the same salary. And you make more money. And they won't do it. Why? Because they understand that if the working class has more time to itself, they're going to strategize and plan to work against the capitalist class, as they should, right? The capitalist class is a psychopathic death cult that's working to destroy humanity. If not through AI, certainly through climate change. So they're not just going to give out things like a basic income, right? They're not just going to give out concessions. They're not just going to be like, oh, wait, we have solutions to problems, right? They've never acted that way. There's not one moment in human history that you can point to that shows that the ruling class looks out at the poor and disenfranchised and willingly says, oh, I know how to help these people. It's always because the ruling class feels threatened. Right? It's always because of a massive labor struggle. It's always because of some kind of rebellion. It's always something like that. There's just no moment in human history where capitalists act rationally or nice. It just doesn't happen. Which is why we need to organize and organize with your neighbors, organize with the people in your building, organize with the people on your street, organize with the people around you, organize with the people in your workplace, with the full intention of taking everything over once the systems stop functioning for your benefit, which is going to happen, right? Like, these systems are already no longer really benefiting you. They're just taxing you and then sending that money overseas to murder children. They're not actually building social services. They're not actually doing anything to benefit you. They're just taking your money from you. And eventually those systems will just completely cease to function at all. And the small scale things that the system does provide for you, right? Like a power grid, right? Like it'll cease working and it'll cease functioning, right? Because that's the nature of the capitalist system. We already see this happening. Like the power grid in America will go down and your electricity bill will triple, right? And you just won't be able to pay it because your wage has stagnated for 40 years. Yeah, Transylvanian, good to see you, by the way. A lot of people don't even get 2 days a week off. It has nothing to do with productivity. It all has to do with keeping the workers down. The less free time and energy you have, the less of a threat you are. Exactly. No, it's exactly right. Okay, so one of my regulars, Exhale. Oh, yeah. Russia could use nuclear weapons if threatened. I mean, that's technically the truth, but I also tend to think that that's something of Western hysteria, right? It pays to remember that the West has every reason to want to scare the shit out of everybody and keep people in line, right? Keep people on the side of we gotta fight against Putin. Putin's a fascist, right? Just yesterday, we had a whole conversation about the Ukrainian crisis and Putin, and yeah, and I think that's actually true. Exhale continues. It says the video is actually showing the opposite, which is to say that Putin has said, sure, we have nuclear protocols, we have nuclear bombs. Sure, that's the truth. You can read what our doctrine is. It's very upfront, but he's not like gung ho, like I'm gonna nuke Paris, like that, which is what the Western media and is what the State Department wants you to feel like, right? That and genuinely, if we were actually concerned about this, if the West was actually concerned about nuclear bombardment from Russia, we would be at the table discussing a peace deal and the surrender of Ukraine. Like, that's what we would be doing. But we're not, because that's not our objective, right? Our objective is to maximize the death and destruction in Ukraine, to tax you to create as much weaponry as possible, to then funnel some small amount of that weaponry into Ukraine while pocketing the taxes that they pilfer from you, right? That's what's actually happening, right? It's a project of extraction. It's a project of extraction that they use this war as an excuse to do it. And it also has the ancillary diplomatic benefit of separating Russia from Europe, which is a goal that America has always wanted to do. I think that is complete foolishness. Like, it's silly. It's not even stupid. It's just silly at the highest possible level. America would be better off negotiating peacefully with its neighbors and with people and offering things and attempting to build up its own infrastructure and attempting to build up its own society. But that's not the structure of the capitalist peace. The structure is extraction of wealth and the building up of a bourgeoisie class, the building up of an ownership class. Paul, over on Twitch. Oh, look, a communist on Twitch. I also stream on Twitch for those of you who are listening. Yeah. Hello. How are you doing? Hope you're here to be beautiful, my man. Joe Anthony, good to see you, my friend. Hey, John, keep it up and thanks. I'm too broke presently. Will contribute as soon as I'm able. We need this. I appreciate that, Joe. It is a good opportunity to say like, share, subscribe, hit those bells, hit those whistles, do all the things you can. If you would like to donate, please consider donating to Patreon. Again, a gigantic thank you to the people who are supporting this. I do think that this work is important, if not for us, then certainly for future generations, to try to decipher what the hell happened here. How was it that our society got taken over by a death cult? Why was it that the only choice we had was between a fascist Zionist and a fascist Zionist? Speaking of fascist Zionists, Biden claims Israel isn't starving Gazans. Right groups says it is clear as day. So one of the things that's definitely happening because of this Gaza crisis, because of all of this, is that the Western ideology and the Western mode of thinking has unraveled. It's no longer the case that Westerners can be taken seriously, and it's no longer the case that the American ideology can be taken seriously. If Biden is going to make this kind of claim, like, if they're going to lie to you about something that is so obviously true, that Israel is most certainly starving Gazans, like, I have read many an article on this very channel that explicitly show you that Israel is most certainly creating a famine in Gaza and is most certainly starving Gazans. So if the Biden administration, if the president of the United States is willing to stand up in front of you and lie about that, then what else are they lying to you about? Right? If they're lying to you about that, perhaps they're lying to you about communism. Perhaps they're lying to you about the history of the Soviet Union. Perhaps they're lying to you about China. Perhaps they're lying to you about what's going on in the rest of the world. And the moment you acknowledge that, maybe these people are fraudulent liars and their mode of thinking and their ideology is completely bereft of any kind of moral position or even just being correct, you can start to see pretty quickly that, yeah, they're lying about pretty much everything, and they're happy to do it. They have no credibility, and we shouldn't pay any attention to what they have to say outside of, let's listen to what the incredulous liars have to say. Paul over on Twitch says, I can't be one, a communist. I'm Christian, and God is ANCAP. I mean, the early Christians were communists, right? Like, very explicitly so. You can read about it in Acts, that the early Christians got together and created systems of aid with one another and basically built communes, right? And the first, like, communes really do come out of the Roman Empire and are built up through the process of Christianity. Like, So to say that Christians cannot be communists, I think, is non-biblical. I think if you actually read your Bible, you'll find that the early Christians were in fact communists. And a lot of what Christ actually says, a lot of what, Jesus Christ actually says is essentially what communists believe, right? Each according to their ability, each according to their need. I'm misquoting that, of course, because I'm a good communist. I don't know how to spell bourgeoisie either. But like Christ, the great commandment is love the Lord your God with all your heart, which if I were to secularize that, could easily be understood as love creation, love reality, love the universe that you're in, the environment that you're in, and love your neighbor as yourself, right? If that's not a communist idea, then I don't know what is. So I don't think that there is any I don't think there's any contradiction to be found between Christianity and communism. The contradiction that exists between what has become called evangelical Christianity, which is non-Christian. It's I don't think if you speak to an evangelical Christian, you realize very quickly that these people despise Christ. If they were to meet Christ, they would call him woke. Evangelical Christians, it's so odd that they even bother calling themselves Christians, because it's clear that they despise Christ. I've never met an evangelical Christian that I would actually describe as a Christian. I don't know why they use the word Christ or Christian, or even evoke the name of Christ, seeing as they despise him so thoroughly. So Paul writes, back in days, each had their own activity and place to own, sell, and live. Jesus is more on this side. I'm going to ask you to clarify that position, because I don't think I understand your comment, Paul. Thanks. Paul, just so you know, my background is evangelical fundamentalist Christianity. I've read the Bible 3 times. I know a lot about it. It is my background. It's one of those texts that I refer to and I actually still read. I don't consider myself a Christian any longer, but I don't reject Christianity as a concept, because I think that it's correct that cultures should try to strive to be better than they are, and I think that that's what the Christian pursuit is. So just so you understand. Jesus is often, this is Paul continuing, Jesus is often a symbol to support conservatives and capitalism in politics. This is part of why it's rooted in me have to go for a conservative party. The left represents all Christianity fights against. Okay, so Paul, I think that what you are describing is the propaganda that conservative Christians put forward. But if you actually read your Bible, and you actually read the text, and you actually read what Jesus actually wrote and what he actually said, you'll find that the opposite is in fact the truth. That conservative, there's no such thing as a Christian capitalist. It doesn't exist. Christ despises capitalists. He literally whipped capitalists out of a temple, and that was the spark for his crucifixion. The idea that Christ is pro-capitalist or pro-conservative or pro-private property is, to put a religious phrase on it, heretical. It is heresy to say so, and it's a ridiculous concept to actually believe. And all you have to do in order to see that as plain as day is read the Bible, right? And not even all of it. Like, pick Matthew or Mark or Luke or John, right? And read either Matthew or Mark or Luke or John, and you will see clear as day, very straightforwardly, that Christ was an egalitarian who was about wealth distribution, who despised private property, and who literally, the only time Christ uses violence is when he drives merchants, capitalists, out of the temple, right? So the concept that Christ is actually a pro-conservative or a pro-capitalist in any way has absolutely nothing to do with Christianity, and I frankly think that it's an extremely despicable position to hold. You're essentially taking Christ, the figure in the Bible, and inverting what he said to match your spoiled, childish, absurdist ideology, which is capitalism, right? You're trying to pretend like Christ would approve of your greed and selfishness, and he wouldn't, explicitly. And you know how I know that? Because I've read the Bible, and I suggest that you do too. And you're going to find out very fast that everything your fraudulent, loser, conservative, capitalist heretics have told you about Christ is false. Jesus approves merit. Again, can you quote me the passage? Like, actually. Jesus approves merit. No one comes to the Father except through me. Okay, big merit. Right? Yeah. Believe. Right? Believe in me, you will ascend to heaven. Remember when Christ literally said to the thief who was dying next to him on the cross, your faith has set you free? Lots of merit there, right? Lots of big merit there, right? So, I think I've stated my case with you, Paul. I think my recommendation to you is actually read your Bible. I'm going to move on. Thanks for commenting, though. Yeah, Compton. Jesus literally healed people for free. Yep. Jesus commanding his followers to sell their goods, live in common. When did Christ tell people to collect rent and keep people from what they need? Yeah, exactly. Peanut Butter Beatrice says, I can't think of a single Christian I know that would give everything they have to the poor. Or anything for that matter. Right? Like, they'll give a $5 a month donation to some kid in Africa. Sure. But if they walk by a homeless person on the street, they'll just spend it on drugs. They'll just spend it on drugs is what they'll do. Armed with opinions, good to see you, my man, over on Twitch. Okay, can you explain something to me about wealth redistribution? I've talked to leftists, maybe liberals, but we'll find out, and commies, who say no billionaires should exist, correct, tax the wealthy, correct, and all that, okay. So how does the communist system work if it depends on taxing the wealthy, but in order to tax them in the first place, they have to accumulate capital? Isn't this a paradox of leftism? No. Economies work in cycles, right? So you imagine a circle, and you imagine wealth going in a circle, right? So you imagine money, like, here, I'll explain it this way. You know how your circulatory system works, right? You know how blood flows through your body, right? So what do you think would happen if all of your blood was in your foot? Right? What do you think that would do to you? It would probably cause a lot of problems, right? It would probably make your foot feel really bad, and it would probably make you feel really bad. It would mean that systems within you, your heart, your liver, your kidneys, your brain, your eyes, your hands, would really struggle. And you'd be really struggling to live and get anything done because all of the blood has pooled in one of your feet. Moreover, you probably couldn't even really use that foot because it would be full of blood. And so, if I said to you, hey, we're going to redistribute the blood throughout your system, right? You would intrinsically understand that that's good, right? That it's not about creating more blood. It's about ensuring the blood is flowing through the entire system with a certain degree of equality, right? So too is it with wealth, with money, with resources. That if resources are piled in a single corner over here, just piled here, well, a large portion of those resources are not being used in the society. And what this means is that you have huge sections of your society that can't actually be productive because they're spending most of their time just trying to eke out survival. So they can't actually contribute meaningfully to the society. They can't actually advance anything. They can't actually get involved in anything. They're just trying to get food in their mouth, right? So if you take the resources that are being hoarded in a corner, doing nothing, literally sitting in offshore accounts, literally just in the corner, literally Kim Kardashian getting on a jet and flying from Los Angeles to Paris in order to get a piece of cheesecake, right? The most wasteful shit you can possibly imagine. Jeff Bezos shooting rockets at space kind of shit. Just waste and corruption at the highest possible level, never before seen in human history. Well, you take those resources and you spread it into the rest of the society and the rest of the system, and all of the sudden these people who are not productive and cannot be productive have resources so that they can become productive in the society. And then all of the sudden, instead of the vast majority of your society falling into stagnation, the vast majority of your society begins to become productive and begins to interact with the systems that suddenly now have life in them, right? Instead of needing to get all of your food and shelter from one guy that's sitting atop a big giant pile of gold, you can get your resources from someone who has a modest living and is operating in your community, right? And that community can build itself up through that process. So the idea that taxing the wealth away from the rich will then somehow peter out, well, no, it won't, because that will distribute into the society, and you can maintain levels of taxation in a broader sort of way, or you can maintain systems in a broader sort of way without needing to rely on the existence of the rich. Literally, the only reason anybody is saying tax the rich is because all of the blood is pooled in your foot, right? Well, once the blood is no longer pooling in your foot, you can create modest systems to just peel off a very small percentage from the highest earners in the society, and it'll work out just fine. And in fact, what you actually find that happens, so in the New Deal period, right, we did this very thing in the New Deal period. The marginal tax rate on the wealthiest people was as high as 95% at one point. We literally taxed away the wealth, right? And what happened? The rich, instead of just experiencing this kind of taxation, they literally said, well, if this is going to be taxed away anyway, I might as well give my workers a raise. If this is going to get taxed away anyway, I might as well, build some infrastructure over here. I might as well be the guy that controls where this money goes. And so I guess I'll give it to my workers, or I'll build, like Grand Central Station was built this way, right? Huge infrastructure projects were built because the billionaires of that day went, well, I'm going to lose this money and they're going to take it from me. And so I might as well spend it myself. And so you can see very clearly that by raising taxes on the wealthy, which I think is a good thing to do, but not the final thing to do. The final thing to do is to eliminate the capitalist class entirely. But you can see very clearly that doing it has extraordinary benefits for the society in very much the same way that redistributing blood that has pooled in your foot into the rest of the system has benefits for that system. I hope that answers your question, my man. Paul writes, you need the top rich to keep the bottom rest of society standing. Kind of an embarrassing thing to say as a Christian friend. Christ explicitly said, sell your property and give it to the poor. Right? Like, I don't think that you can actually call yourself a Christian and say that sort of thing. how do you get rid of the capitalist class? What a great question. What a great question. People are coming in here with really good questions today, I tell you what. Radio Halifax over on YouTube, good to see you. Anemone, good to see you. Loaf, always a pleasure. So glad that you guys are here. Thank you so much for joining me today. How do you get rid of the capitalist class? So, the first thing that you want to do, and the first thing, the thing to read, right, to really understand this, the book to read would be Lenin's What Is to Be Done. Right? Because that's fundamentally what you're asking. What is to be done? How do we actually organize this? And how you actually do it is by gathering your neighbors, gathering workers in factories, gathering the working class, right? The proletariat, what's called the proletariat, and simply taking systems over and saying to the capitalists, you're no longer part of this. You're not going to actually just extract wealth from us any longer, and we're not going to take it seriously anymore. We are going to be the beneficiaries of the work that we do. And the workers essentially reclaim the society that is stolen from them by the capitalist class that is not really participating in the society, but is extracting value and extracting wealth from that society. And that is the way forward. And through that process, you erect systems that essentially exclude capitalists from the decision-making process. So we acknowledge that we are in the what is called the dictatorship of capital, right? And you can see that clear as day, right? You can't vote for somebody who isn't a capitalist, right? Both Donald Trump and Joe Biden, right, are capitalists. Here in Canada, Justin Trudeau, Pierre Poilievre, and Jagmeet Singh are all capitalists. So you are voting always for a capitalist. Now, you might vote for a capitalist that says, I'll give you 0.4% increase in your benefits over 10 years. Or you might vote for the capitalist that says, I'm going to commit hard austerity against you. So you get to vote for the good cop or the bad cop. But they're both capitalists, and they both operate for the benefit of capitalism. And so we say we live in the dictatorship of capital. And what the communists say is we need to erect a system that fundamentally says at its root, at the very base of it, if you're a capitalist, you are not going to be a part of this. We are going to erect a dictatorship of the proletariat, and explicitly say, "Oh, you're a shareholder. Oh, you're a landlord. Great. You do not get to be part of the decision-making apparatus at all, and your opinion does not matter to us. We will not listen to what you have to say." Very plainly. And the way to do this, of course, is to raise class consciousness amongst the populace, is to gather people en masse. Like, where the people go is where the society actually follows. And if the entire society declared all at once that something is so, then it would be so. So it's about creating a consensus, agreeing that the system of capital is no longer functioning. It's not working for the benefit of the working class. It never really did, but admitting it, acknowledging it, seeing through the propaganda, understanding that capitalists are fraudulent liars who will commit genocides with your tax money, and simply excluding them from the decision-making process. So that's a long-term goal, but it can be done, and we've seen nations do exactly that. The capitalists, of course, will not go down quietly. They will not simply bend the knee and say, "Oh yes, sir, whatever you say," right? So they'll murder people, for sure, and we need to be prepared for that. Medicare over on Twitch says, "You need some kind of moderation, bro. Stupid right-wingers think they're clever with their crappy takes." Medicare, I think it's important that we have right-wingers come in here to be confronted, right? That it's not simply enough to just be like, "Bad take, bro." And I'm working on this myself. I'm always trying to find language, and I'm always trying to find ways to engage to have people confront what you say, their bad takes, right? And so I'm not happy with the idea. The only time I'll ever ban anybody, I have two very clear, hard red lines or three rather. One is if you're just rude. If you just come in here and you're a jerk and you're mean to people, I'll just ban you. And I don't care what your position is. Like if you're just disruptive and causing problems because you have no manners and you don't know how to talk to people, out you go. Right? If you're not intelligent enough to know how to speak to people with a little bit of dignity and grace, then you're not smart enough to talk to. So that's one. Two, if you say any Nazi shit or do any Nazi apologetics, you're gone right away. Sometimes I think people stumble into that a little bit inadvertently. They don't quite realize that what they're doing is Nazi apologetics because they've been so conditioned to espouse Nazi apologetics. So, for example, saying Nazis and communists are the same is Nazi apologetics, for sure. Like, no, they're not, very plainly. You have to be a very foolish person to actually believe that. And then the third thing is rude, Nazism. The third thing, I forget what the third thing is offhand. Yeah, there you go. But I do think that we should allow. I've definitely had really nice conversations with people who think that who call themselves right-wingers in this place, and I think it's a good opportunity for me to attempt to educate, attempt to talk to their issues, and sometimes I think there are just good people who are surrounded by bad propaganda. I think that that's just the truth. That good people are just surrounded by news media and outlets and education systems that are lying to them and can be convinced of that. And so I'm not going to hate people simply because they are on the right, until they show that they're not actually on the right. They're a Nazi, or they're just, rude. Armed says, can we just give tax breaks? Oops. Hold on. I like the questions that Armed is asking, so I'm gonna Armed with opinions. Can we just give tax breaks to working class people or something? Do we need the whole communism thing? I really don't want to go to a gulag, man. Look, man, first I'd like to address the gulag point. Gulags were prisons, right? You know who went to gulags? Assassins, criminals, and Nazis. Those are the people that went to gulags. Okay, so this whole they'll round you up if they don't like the color of shoe you're wearing, right? Like, yes, I'm sure Western propagandists wants you to think this. Okay, what you're describing, of course, is just social democracy. Why can't we do social democracy, right? Oh, yes, thank you, Eggs D. Hold on, before I go on. Eggs D, hit the third one. If you show me that you're not engaging with reality, and yet you insist to clutter the chat, you insist to continue filling the chat with nonsense. So the clearest example is if you're a flat earther, right? Like, if you come in here and you're a flat earther, I'll just ban you, right? You're not engaging meaningfully with reality. You're wasting everybody's time. You're just cluttering everything with your presence. Like, I don't care if you are a flat earther and you shut up about it. Like, if you stay quiet about it, fine, right? Well, not really, actually. Like, being a flat earther is, if you can believe something as ridiculous as that, then you can believe anything, right? You're not capable of being rational. You're not capable of seeing reality, right? You can just believe anything you want if you believe the earth is flat. And if you believe that, I'm trying to think of a really good example. Oh yeah, like if you just refuse to engage with evidence, and if you refuse to provide evidence, or refuse to acknowledge historical facts or historical truths that are real, then I'll just ban you, and I'm just not interested in your presence, because we here at the Canadian Commie believe very strongly in evidence for our decision making. And if you're going to insist that what you say is true in spite of evidence that I can show you, then I'm not interested in your position. And if you continue to try to engage me and you continue to try to shut down conversation, and usually these people just get belligerent and insulting anyway, so. Armed says, if communist society is run how leftist Twitch chats are, we are all fucked. I disagree. I think a society that is running on consensus that acknowledges reality and doesn't permit Nazis and assholes is a fine society indeed, right? If we actually train people to, treat each other well and treat each other with respect and dignity, and if we actually insisted that evidence be the way that we make decisions, I think that we would be a better place. Would it mean that the delusional assholes would be put out? Sure. I'm fine with that. I'm willing to bite down on that bullet. Right? I mean, you are talking to a guy that explicitly thinks that if you think the earth is flat, you should go to a facility and be re-educated. Like, flatly. I think that is a net good for the society. Right? And you can call that authoritarian if you like, but having these people walk around who think the earth is fucking flat, like, all they're doing is causing mayhem. All they're doing is causing problems for people. That's all they're doing. Like, if you're willing to stand up and say the earth is flat in front of people and actually defend that, like, what else? What else do you think? Right? How do you create consensus? Like, how do you create consensus with somebody like this? No, I didn't say camps. Right? School. Right? You've been to school, right? Armed with opinions. This is an interesting point, armed with opinions. You're coming... Armed with opinions is coming in with some really interesting stuff and wants some, like, clarifications. Yeah, no quotations, armed. Just school. Right? There is such a thing as a classroom. Right? Like, I know that guys like Jordan Peterson cry about it when they have to go to a classroom and actually receive an education, but, it's called standards. We would like to have standards in our society. Armed with Opinions writes, one small issue. Leftists have a tendency to call a broad spectrum of people fascists, to the point that the term just means anyone not on my team. I think that there's truth to that. I do think that leftists do have a tendency to do that. Just as leftists also have a tendency, I think, to be kind of puritanical in the worldview that they hold. There is like a moral purity fetish that comes out of the left a lot of times, which I try to fight pretty hard against. But it is also true that the society is widely fascist, right? Fascism is a very popular ideology in our society. So there's a line to be walked there. And I also feel like people who have fascist tendencies and who hold fascist beliefs, like libertarians, for example, like libertarians are broadly fascist, right? But they don't believe that they are fascists, and they won't acknowledge that they are fascists, right? So you have people who are fascists who get called fascist and then just say, anything you don't like is fascism. Like, no, bro, you're a fascist. Right? Like, if you're arguing for child slavery, you're probably a fascist, right? Like somebody like Murray Rothbard does, right? And so I think that libertarians are a perfect example of this. A group of people who refuse to acknowledge that they're fascists, who try to create a label, which incidentally they co-opted a leftist label. Libertarian was a leftist label, and they co-opted that for themselves. Look, fascists co-opting leftists' language in order to promote their own ideology and try to create mainstream appeal. No one's ever done that before. Adolf Hitler. And so, from the outside, like, if you are a fascist, or if you're fascist adjacent, you can say, but you don't believe it. You don't actually think you are. then people have a tendency to just say, "Oh, you just think everything you don't like," and it's like, "No, bro, like you're broadly a fascist," like pretty straightforwardly. Like if you're part of the foundation of economic freedom, right? You're a fascist. If you call yourself a libertarian, yeah, you're probably just a fascist. Transylvanian writes, the point to build a system that does not require band-aid corrective measures like taxation, because it's already set up in such a way that it does not generate those kinds of massive imbalances. Yeah, I think there's truth on that. Yeah, taxation does not solve the underlying systemic problem, yeah, which is who owns what, right? Who owns the means of production? Who owns the workplace, right? Who owns your productivity? Who owns this? Armed continues. You think fascism is a popular ideology? Yes. I actually think it's the most popular ideology. Like, I think that it is widely popular across the United States and even in Canada. I think that it's become so popular that many people who call themselves liberals, so for example, the Democrats and the Liberal Party here in Canada, they would consider themselves not fascist. Well, congratulations, I consider you fascist. If you're supporting a genocide while saying the genocide isn't happening, you're a fascist, right? If you are supportive of the idea of invading other countries and destroying them, right? Congratulations, you're a fascist. Yeah, and Pan over on YouTube points out, neoliberalism is another name for fascism. I have made the argument, and I still support the argument, that neoliberalism is a relabeling and a rebranding of fascism. That within the spectrum of fascism, now let's be really clear here, right? Let's be really clear here. I'm going to read the rest of your comment, by the way, Armed. I'm not ignoring it. Let's be really clear here. Fascism is not Nazism, right? Not Nazism is is a strain of fascism, right? So not every fascist is a Nazi, but every Nazi is a fascist, right? So the offshoot of fascism that Nazism is the superior race theory, that there is a one pure race. Zionists fit into this as well, right? There is one pure race and there is a sub-race, and the sub-race should be eliminated by the pure race, right? Well, neoliberalism acknowledged that this offshoot of fascism was harmful, that it didn't work, it wasn't helpful, and everybody hated it, and you end up in an antagonistic war with everybody and probably defeated, right? And so neoliberals said, why don't we keep doing fascism, but we will have this inclusion narrative, we'll have this diversity narrative, we'll say, we just need more women CEOs. We just need black CEOs, right? We just need the ruling class to become slightly more diverse. And we won't actively seek to purge inferior races, even if we think they're inferior races, as long as the system of fascism gets to continue moving forward. So I definitely disagree with your idea that fascism isn't a popular idea. I mean, you can see it in the Liberal Party, in the Conservative Party, in the Democratic Party. It's a very popular ideology. Just because somebody doesn't want you to think they are a fascist doesn't mean they're not a fascist. Armed continues, right? Respectfully, I'd have to disagree. Yeah, I appreciate that. These are difficult ideas and difficult thoughts, right? And they're worth talking about. And I have to tell you, I really appreciate how you're handling yourself with this. So thank you so much. If you are referring to Twitter under Elon's reign, not really. Like, Elon Musk is just sort of a boob. Those people are just loud and lots of bots, total mirage. I mean, it pays to remember that most fascist regimes are upheld by about 30% of the public, right? That it's not really just because they're loud doesn't mean they're not effective. Yeah, my feed is cancer, but it's easy to filter out. Libertarians aren't fascists. And yeah, sure, they absolutely are. I don't think that's accurate. because the ones I know are anti-war. Well, anti-this war, right? Anti-wars that aren't working out, right? Like, that's a very Tulsi Gabbard position, right? Like, you'll find that libertarians are not anti-war. They're just anti-wars that we lose, right? That fundamentally within the ideology, war is absolutely something we should do when we win, right? Smart wars make a lot of sense to libertarians. Pro-individual rights with respect to LGBT and drugs, etc. That's definitely not how it was under the historical fascist regime. So again, right? So let me offer a point of clarity, okay? Like, again, Nazism isn't fascism, right? And it's easy to confuse this. It's easy to look at Hitler's Nazi regime and go, that's fascism, and nothing else is, right? So I take the line, and let's be really clear on something as well. There isn't a consensus about what is or is not fascism, right? That it's not like there's a one-liner that everybody points to and says that's fascism, right? But fascism, in my view, was best articulated by Mussolini, who said fascism is better called corporatism because it is the merger of business and state. And so to understand what fascism is, I describe it like this. You know what a theocracy is, right? You know what a theocracy is. That theocracy is the merger of church and state, right? So when the church and the state merge, it's a theocracy, and we fully understand what that is, and it's not a difficult concept for us to grapple with, right? So fascism is the merger of business and state. When the state apparatus and the business apparatus merge for the benefit of the business and not the benefit of the people, right? In the same way that if a church merges for the benefit of the church and not the people, it's a theocracy. Well, if businesses merge with the state and it's not for the benefit of the people, right? What do you have? So you can see very cleanly, right? Many of the ideas and many of the thoughts that exist within our society exist along those lines. That do you think that the business class has merged with the do you think that the business class has merged with the state? I would argue very strongly that yes, in fact, it has. That the business class has most definitely merged, right, with the state. And under those lines, we can understand that, yeah, of course, fascism is a very popular idea and a very popular ideology. We just don't call it that because we understand what that means, right? We understand what fascism evokes within the mind of the listener, right? No one's willing to stand up and say that I am a fascist. Except, people like Kanye West when he's having a mental breakdown, right? And I mean, Joe is asking the question, how is there any question anymore if the West is fascist, right? And so Armed continues, I'd take issue with you saying libertarians are only opposed to wars that aren't being won. I know a lot of them very vocal against the Iraq War, back when there was an extremely unpopular opinion to hold. No, I'm sure that you could find within the spectrum of people who consider themselves libertarian, but when you actually look at what institutional libertarians are saying, and those would be the people that I would be most interested in discussing things with, right? Like I'm sure that the broad that there are large sections of Catholics who are against pedophilia, but the Catholic Church is a pro-pedophile organization, right? So I don't necessarily when you break everything down to the smallest, if like you find one person who calls themselves a libertarian and then says they're anti-war, okay, well that doesn't speak for the broad position and the institutional libertarians, right? That there are multi-million-dollar organizations that consider themselves libertarian, that speak along these lines, right? That they're against war when they're losing, and they're for war if they think they can win, right? That they still think that they should be what they would call good stewards of the globe, when what they mean is the policemen of the globe, as long as they can win, right? As long as they think that they're doing good wars, right? Good wars are what we're looking for, right? June, you said earlier, and I don't want to ignore what you were saying, because you often say very interesting things, that the Mussolini quote is a fake quote. Oftentimes quotes are fake, but they're attributed to people. So it is more accurate to say that this quote has been attributed to Mussolini. Like, there's a lot of quotes that everybody is like, that person said that, and it turns out maybe or maybe not, but it's been attributed to Mussolini. So and so, yeah, I think you're probably technically, as always, June, as always, you're technically correct. The best kind of correct. Armed with Opinion says, wasn't Mussolini a classically trained Marxist? So, everybody was a classically trained Marxist. Like, in Europe at that time, Germany and Italy were actually considered to be the dead center of communism. Right? It's impossible to not be trained in Marxist thought during that period of time. Like straight up. Like literally impossible. So to say that Mussolini was a classically trained Marxist, it's like, yeah, he also knew how to read. Right? Like the communist movement post-World War I was actually strongest in Germany and Italy. That's the reason why the fascist response was so strong there. Because the industrial capitalists knew and understood that if they allowed this communist way of thinking to continue spreading the way it was, that the inevitable end of the capitalist class was coming. And so they had to fight back. And so what they did is they found people who were willing to betray their own countrymen and betray their own Marxist upbringing for their own benefit, and were willing to be bought out. Like that's what happened with Mussolini and Hitler. They were willing to be bought out, and I think Mussolini is like just a straight up traitor. Like he's just straight up like, I used to be part of these socialist and Marxist ideas, and then you put a suitcase of money in front of me, and I said, now I'm a capitalist, right? And I think it is as clean as that when it comes to Mussolini. I think in terms of Hitler, I think that he was just a psychopath, and he was always a psychopath. That he was always involved in these organizations just to try to destroy them. And I think that that's pretty cleanly the case with Hitler. We've got really clear evidence to show that, like, for example, for God's sakes, the guy wrote Mein Kampf, right? Like, you just read Mein Kampf and you're like, yeah, this guy's a psychopath. Pretty nakedly. It's pretty obvious that he got joy out of suffering and joy out of hurting people. Anybody who interacted with him during World War I was like, this guy likes this. He enjoys World War I. Like, he likes war. He likes fighting. He likes death. He likes these things. Sort of odd. June writes, I disagree that fascism is the merger of the state and private property. If that was the case, then fascism has been around for thousands of years, and slave societies could be considered fascist. Yeah. I gotta tell you, June, I'm actually kind of okay with that. Like, I don't think it's quite the same, because you do have different structures and different systems at play, and the relationships are a little bit different. But honestly, if we had a big conversation about, let's say, the Roman Empire, and we all came out of it going like, yeah, this this looks like fascism. Like, this is, I'd be pretty much like, yeah, I'm fine with that. Like, the Romans were literally publicly crucifying people, right? So, they didn't have the word fascism. Fascism is actually, it comes out of Mussolini's party, the Facili party, right? Which is Mussolini's party. I think it means brotherhood, if I'm not mistaken on that. But just because we created the terminology later doesn't mean it didn't exist earlier. Some people call it proto-fascism. Yeah. And now we're getting into the reality of this conversation, which is that there isn't actually a consensus, right? That's at the highest level of the conversation in the academic structures. There isn't actually a consensus. So I'm just trying to tell you what my perception of things is and what I think is going on in the world. Yeah, Mussolini, the OG leaving the left guy. Yeah, and Hitler was the same, right? So, and I think the big difference there is that at one point, I think you could say that Mussolini was a genuine leftist. I don't think you can say the same thing of Adolf Hitler. I think that he was always just a psycho. Joe Anthony writes, John, what is your opinion on the military and police role as an establishment guard dogs? Can enough of them be swayed? Yeah, Joe, what a great question. Like, the reality is that as soon as the state abandons the ruling class, that's the end of the ruling class. And I think it really does come down to, like, if you have the mass of the people standing in front of the halls of power, calling for a revolution, and the police refuse to act against them and refuse to prevent them from acting against the ruling class, then that's essentially it. Like, that's the end of it. So the military and police are very clearly establishment guard dogs, right? Like, all of the laws that are written and all of the things that exist within the system of capital could not be upheld without the force of violence. It's sort of strange that something that is quote-unquote human nature needs to be upheld through acts of extraordinary violence, but okay. And I tend to think that, yeah, it is an effective strategy to convince people not to be involved in the police and military and not to be involved in these organizations. And if they are involved in these organizations, to seek to be against the capitalist class. That as soon as the capitalist class shows that it is not actually capable of ruling, like, most coups through human history are literally people within the military being like, these guys are morons, and just taking over, right? Like, that's most coups. And so is that going to be a positive thing or a negative thing? Only time can tell, right? And only I mean, I feel like the ACAB movement, all cops are bastards movement, has a strong conception of itself, and it is pretty difficult to justify. Why are you joining the military? Why are you joining the police force? Given the clearly harmful nature of the system of capital. Transylvanian writes, the symbol of fascism was originally a Roman symbol. Roman society was very much proto-fascist. Loaf writes, fascism in power is the open terrorist dictatorship of most reactionary, most chauvinistic, and most imperialist elements of finance capital. Georgy Dimitrov. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would say that in order to necessitate the structure of fascism as it is, that's exactly what you need to have, right? That eventually these structures and these systems become untenable for the public, right? The public is not going to go along with it anymore because the system's no longer serving them and it's no longer benefiting them, right? And we're starting to see that here in Canada, right? If you're under the age of 30, you know you're never getting a house. Like, that's over. You're going to own nothing and be happy according to the system as it stands now, right? So you already know this. And as this continues to develop, more things are going to be stripped away as the society becomes more and more openly fascist. That there is a difference, like, just because they're not doing Nazi marches and having Nazi parades, even though our government honors Nazis in its parliament, doesn't mean they're not fascists. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, there's a very, like, there's the big moment of, like, the bum 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 dun 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 dun. Like, just because they're not actually openly crucifying people along the streets doesn't mean they're not already fascist, right? Just because they're willing to murder children overseas doesn't mean they're not, like, just because they're not murdering your children doesn't mean they're not already fascists, right? So I do think there is this sort of proclivity amongst Western societies to be like, no, of course, we're not fascist. No, of course we're not fascist. We only murder people in countries that aren't ours. Oh, okay, bud. Right? Like, that seems to be the distinction. Like, one of the things I used to say about this, kind of on this point, is if capitalism is happening to someone else's nation, it's capitalism, but if it's happening to you, it's fascism, right? Like, so I don't really create that distinction. Just because you're murdering foreigners instead of your own citizens, right, doesn't make it any less fascist. And eventually, any society that murders its own murders foreigners, eventually those people come home, right? Like, eventually those people come home, and those people become the ruling class. And like, you can see it with guys like Dan Crenshaw, for example, right? Like, this is how this actually happens, right? Yeah, and I think Anemone is pointing something out here too, which is, like, it's very difficult for me to believe that a society that, like, was literally founded on genocide and slavery, we shouldn't call these guys fascist. Looks pretty fucking fascist to me, right? Like, we're literally in here being like, yeah, we have the right to enslave the black population because we're a superior race. That black people are naturally born to be slaves, and we should eradicate the First Nations people, and they're better off for it. Like, these are legitimate arguments that we were making, right? It sounds pretty fascist, right? Sounds pretty fascist. David writes, "Why are you not talking via Discord?" I don't know if I understand your comment, David, but thanks for being here. Yeah, if it quacks like a duck, right? Anemone writes, "Yeah, this is why we need a children's book. John has been having this conversation for, like, I don't know, 6 years now. Not quite 6 years, but thanks, Anemone. I've been here for a minute. It's true. And boy, howdy, am I glad you guys have been along for the ride, man. What a beautiful journey it has been. I'm hoping that I'm doing this podcast now, and I'm going to start doing podcasts. I'm hoping everything's going to explode on me, and I'll become internationally famous all of a sudden." Oh, I see what you're saying, David. Like, why don't I have a debate bro conversation? There's lots of reasons why I don't want to have that conversation. Like, there's lots of reasons why I don't want to do that. I don't find them to be constructive. I find them to be primarily annoying. Okay. Moving on. Yeah. So, we were just having a conversation about fascism and whether or not our society is in fact fascist. U.S. lawmakers vote to sanction the ICC over Gaza war crimes probe against Netanyahu government. Yeah, that's a normal thing, right? We here in America believe in international law. We're a society that's built on the principles of international law, and that's what gives us our strength as a people. What? They want to use the international law against us. We here in America are sanctioning the court responsible for upholding international law. Like, hard to take it seriously, right? Like, hard to actually, like, take America seriously when it stands up and says we believe in international law, right? The system of international law is the path to global peace, as long as those international laws don't apply to us. And when they do apply to us, we're going to sanction the organizations that were put in place to uphold international law, and start to condemn the system of international law, right? This is actually a major turning point for the credibility of the West, right? We have the ICC and the ICJ to thank for pursuing this criminal case against Israel, but it's this turn. It's the turning against the international system itself, when it doesn't act in alignment to their desires, that show their hypocrisy and show their incredulity, that they are no longer credible, right? They're no longer credible. June writes, sure, this is an interesting point, actually. They were espousing ideas. So America, I assume, is espousing ideas of liberty and personal freedom and democracy, whereas fascists have an open disdain for democracy. So, does rhetoric count? I think is what we're asking, right? Like, does it matter what they say, or does it matter what they do? Because I don't see many politicians or political people within the system of America who actually believe in the concept of liberty and personal freedom and democracy. Like, they only seem to believe in these things, and I think the what I'm showing you right now with the U.S. lawmakers voting to sanction the ICC, they only seem to care about these things as long as they benefit them, right? As soon as they no longer benefit them, they're willing to throw all of those concepts under the bus, right? That it's liberty for them, right? It's freedom for them to own slaves, right? Like, it's freedom for them to dominate others. It's freedom for them to go to war. It's freedom, right, for them to do these things. But if somebody were to say, yeah, but those people should be free from your war and they should be free from your slavery, now suddenly it's authoritarian, right? So it is like we're having a rhetorical game, right? Yeah, do we need to mention the 50K plus dead in Gaza? I mean, Gaza is an unraveling point, right? The Gaza is an unraveling point. It's very difficult for America and the West generally to maintain their credibility while upholding this genocide, right? No one should take America seriously in regards to its rhetoric when its actions are so out of pace and so out of line with what they think and what they believe. Oh, so David, I'll just be clear then. I was being a bit side-eyed with that comment, so I'll be as clear with this. The reason why I don't want to have like a debate-style conversation is because I genuinely don't think that they are constructive. I don't think that they're helpful, and in truth, I hate doing them. Like, that's the bottom line on it. I hate doing them. I find them to be very, very difficult. I find them to be very tedious. They drain me in terms of my energy. I could not do a debate bros style conversation 3 nights a week. And my goal, of course, is to expand this into 5 nights a week. I just could not have like people calling in and having conversations with people in that kind of what I have been calling debate bros style, because the truth is that people are rude, flippant, dismissive, and there's a lot of gish galloping that happens, a lot of interrupting, and I find it to be very frustrating and primarily annoying. So I am not saying that people here would do that. I'm just saying that when I have done that in the past, I have found it to be extraordinarily difficult and extraordinarily annoying. And I think the primary... Yeah, online debates demonstrate why moderation is needed for a debate. And for me, the primary thing that gets very frustrating is there is a general unwillingness to accept evidence or reality. And once you kind of reach that point in a conversation, the conversation more or less ends. And you just kind of end up going in a circle, right? And as soon as you get caught in that circle, you might as well just say, well, thanks for tuning in, goodbye, right? And it's something that perhaps maybe I will do now that I've been doing this for a while, and I kind of have my standards set, and I kind of have an expectation of what I expect to see, and I understand when to cut it off a little bit better. Maybe I'll move in that direction, but historically speaking, I have found it to be very difficult. And not something that I have enjoyed doing. So doing it this way, where people write comments, I read the comment, and then I respond to the comment, I find that to be much, much more satisfying and much more... And frankly, I think people get more out of it. I think it allows people on the other side of the conversation to write more thoughtfully and to make more thoughtful contributions. And I really value that. Like, I would say that Armed with Opinions really asked some very thoughtful and made some thoughtful comments here. And I really valued that. And I think that's something that uplifts me, right? Whereas doing it the other way, it just makes me want to shoot myself in the face. So I don't think I'm going to do it. But thank you for asking. I do appreciate it. It's always worth reconsidering. It's always worth reconsidering. And perhaps one day I'll feel to be able to do it. Anemone writes, I miss the Monday streams, to be honest. Yeah, dude, I would like to stream 5 days a week. I'd like to stream 8 hours a day. Like, if it was up to me, that's what I would be doing. But, you know, the system of capital exists. And that's just how it is. And perhaps one day it will be the case that I will be able to do that. And if you want that to happen, please like, share, subscribe, do the stuff. Be sure to donate. Every little bit counts. Even if you're sitting there thinking like, well, certainly $1 wouldn't help. Yes, it would. It absolutely would. So please consider donating to the Patreon. You can go to thecanadiancommie.com, or you can go to patreon.com/thecanadiancommie. Please consider donating. Thank you very much. Yeah, meanwhile, this is from Transylvanian. Meanwhile, what they actually mean by democracy and freedom is a liberal bourgeois political system that can be bought and controlled by capital, and the freedom of capital to exploit workers. Yeah, exactly. Like, these are sort of coded words, right? They've created like a series of code words that when they say these things, right? Like we're going to Iraq to liberate it. Yeah, we're going to Iraq to liberate it on behalf of corporate fossil fuel companies, right? Like, so they're just kind of talking in a kind of a code. Speaking of, here's a bit of good news for you guys. Oh yeah, I've been looking forward to reporting this all day. FBI raids Atlanta corporate landlord in probe of rental market price fixing. The federal government's antitrust investigation into price fixing in the rental market appears to have found a fulcrum in Atlanta after a surprise FBI raid of multifamily property developer Cortland Management. The May 22nd search comes as the Biden administration's Justice Department has reportedly deepened its price-fixing probe into Texas-based tech company RealPage over its rental pricing software and whether it colluded with landlords to raise rent. Yeah, we should take their properties away from them and distribute them into the public. In a statement to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Cortland management said that the FBI had executed a limited search warrant at the company's Atlanta office as part of the Justice Department's investigation into potential antitrust violations in the multifamily housing industry. Like, you know things are getting really, really bad when the FBI is raiding corporate landlords. Like, that's how you know things have gone fucking totally sideways, right? Like, the level of corruption that exists in the system and the level of fraudulence that exists in the system is so huge and so deep that for the FBI to actually take action like this, someone's doing some real fucky shit. Real fucky shit. We are cooperating fully with the investigation, and we understand that neither Cortland nor any of our employees are targets of that investigation. Due to the ongoing litigation, we cannot comment further at this time, the company said in an emailed statement. LexisNexis. I like that name a lot. I like that name a lot, by the way. LexisNexis, MLex, an industry publication covering regulatory and antitrust matters, first reported news of the search last week. Founded in 2005 in Atlanta, Cortland owns tens of thousands of units and manages apartment complexes across the U.S., with offices in Charlotte, Dallas, Denver, Greenwich, Houston, Orlando, and Phoenix, according to information on its website. Yeah, that's normal. This is normal. It's completely normal that there's like a huge conglomerate organization that owns tens of thousands of units across the country. That's a normal thing that we should definitely allow to see happen, right? Just some private landlord, right? Like, what is this except a parasite? What is this except a parasite? This isn't like, oh, my grandma owns a house and she's living alone in the house now and she's got an empty basement and so she'll just rent out the basement for a little bit of extra money in her twilight years, like the capitalist class wants you to think everything is. This is literally a company that owns tens of thousands of units, right? It says tens of thousands. So is it 20,000? Is it 90,000? Is it 100,000? We don't know. But tens of thousands of units, right? And manages apartment complexes across the United States. Like, this is parasitical behavior, right? This is parasitical behavior. Oh, I have to interrupt this because Paul, you've kind of hit something here. Can you clarify what it is you mean when you say, what do you think about the whole communist Hitler Mussolini narrative? There's some content I support out there. I haven't deepened into it. I'm going to assume that what you're referring to is that this comment that says Hitler was a socialist, or are you referring to the idea that communism and Nazism are the same, or that they're similar ideologies? So there's two different points there. So if you could clarify which point you'd like me to talk about, that would be wonderful. Clunker John, good to see you, my man. With my current employer, Clunker John writes, a corporate-owned diesel salvage yard, the middle managers act like owners, never helping us in the trenches and working remote, disappearing as they please, yeah. They're all Trumpists, non-church-going Christians, alcoholics. They protect each other, as all us workers are insanely burnt out. They use fear as their tactic and tell us we're lucky to have a job. It feels like fascism rising, and I'm worried to even say anything because I'm already a black sheep, weird intellectual. Clunker John, I am here to encourage you to speak with your fellow workers and unionize your workforce. It's all you've got, dude. It literally is. It's that or quit or tolerate it. Those are your three options, right? Find another job, tolerate it, or organize with your fellow workers and unionize. Unionization is not actually as difficult as you think it is. Speak with a union lawyer, fill out some union cards, declare that you've unionized. I got to tell you, dude, sounds to me like you could really use it. Like you could really do it. Moving on back to the article. Cortland is one of several corporate landlords facing civil litigation for their alleged role in a purported nationwide conspiracy to fix and inflate the price of multifamily rental homes. In 2022, ProPublica investigation into how RealPage's technology could be artificially inflating rents sparked dozens of class action lawsuits across the country. The government opened an antitrust investigation into RealPage in November 2022. We just shouldn't allow these organizations to exist at all. Like, what the hell are you talking about? Let's let the market decide. Well, this is what the market's doing. It's completely fucking us over. In March, Politico reported that the DOJ had opened a criminal investigation. The news outlet relied on 4 unnamed sources with knowledge of the matter. RealPage spokeswoman Jennifer Bowcock declined to comment on search. She said the company is cooperating with the government, the civil claims against the company are meritless, and the company's tech is purposefully built to be legally compliant. Sure. This genocide is happening within the full constraints of the law. Yeah. Would Trumpers be open to a union? Oh, like the no, not the managers. Anemone writes, all you need is a portion of your coworkers to be willing to give you a portion of their pay and dues, and labor, specifically union lawyer, like John said. They also need to have their names and signatures in a document together. That will really help you, yeah. I mean, oh, Paul has continued. So let me just finish with this article. Fuck landlords, right? We need to stop thinking of rent as this different thing. It's taxes. When you are paying rent, you are paying taxes. You are paying taxes to a landlord. It's in the title, right? You have a feudal lord that owns you, and you pay taxes, rent, to that landlord. That's what's going on. That's what's going on. Paul continues. The relation between Marxism and Nazism. So you're going to find pretty quickly that there isn't actually a relation between Marxism and Nazism. The other day on Discord Politics, there are many folks who claim National Socialist German Party was of socialist orientation and are clear in its politics and organization, acting more towards an immediate market social welfare socialism in transition to communism. I then looked in ChatGPT, okay, and there were state-owned main industries. What do you think on this? So let's be really clear, okay? When Nazism appears and when fascism appears in Europe, communism is very popular. It is not possible to organize a political organization without using words like socialism. If you created a party in Germany, or if you were part of a party in Germany that didn't say it was somehow socialist, you would be ignored. The World War I was an extremely devastating war and turned most of the population against capitalism. I think that's really, really important to understand. That everybody understood that World War I was a capitalist war caused by capitalists, and people were willing to fight against capitalists because they had literally just fought each other in a war. And so they were willing to continue that fight by seizing factories, by seizing control of the means of production directly, right? So for capitalist industrialists to have any political sway whatsoever and to get involved in politics at all, they needed to at least be a wolf in sheep's clothing. They at least needed to say that they were socialists. They at least needed to say the word socialism, or else they would just be completely fucking ignored. No one would pay any attention to them whatsoever. So there's this propagandistic aspect of this where where in order to gain any political truck, they at least need to pretend like they're interested in socialism. And but when you actually take a look at their politics, when you take a look at what they were politically, and what their goals were, it had nothing to do with Marxism. Yeah, June points out the word privatization was coined to describe the Nazi economic policies and were definitely not socialism. Yeah, also fascism is an important part of the communist understanding of capitalism, certainly. And there's a strong adversarial relationship between the two. Fascist rhetoric relies on the threat of communism to drum up fear and support. Absolutely. And so to point out that people like Mussolini or Hitler came up in organizations that call themselves socialist is like, yeah, of course they did. Like, I just don't think you understand what was actually happening in post-World War I Europe at the time. That post-World War I Europe was a highly communist society. It was becoming a highly communist society. Communists were literally taking over factories, literally taking over the means of production. Communism was a very popular ideology at that time. And so National Socialism as a conception needs to, in order to survive within this political environment, needs to pretend as though it's interested in socialist ideas, even though it's very clearly not. Like, very, very clearly not. That what Hitler does is essentially pull the workers away from a collective work action and get them to focus on wedge issues, like the Jews, for example, the Bolsheviks, right? The cultural Marxists, right? The kind of rhetoric that Jordan Peterson uses in order to get working people to fight one another, right? In a divide and conquer strategy. The people who are standing up and are trying to pretend as though the Nazis were somehow socialist or were at all interested in Marxism in a serious way are, to put the finest point on it, illiterate, they're and likely duplicitous, right? That they're not actually interested in knowing anything about what was actually going on. They're not actually interested in history. They're not actually interested in the facts of the matter. And also, I go so far to say that to say so is a form of Nazi apologetics, even if you stand up and say Nazism is bad, but communism is the same as Nazism, right? If you say that, that is a form of Nazi apologetics, because what it is doing is it makes it so that when the Nazis come to power, or when they begin to act in order to try to take power, the people who are in the middle, the masses of the public, who are just sort of dealing with their lives and are not necessarily political, well, it means that they won't turn to the communists. That if the viewpoint of the masses is that the communists are just as bad as the Nazis, well, then when the cure to Nazism is right in front of them, they won't take it, right? So it's a method by which Nazis use in order to smear their opponents, and makes it a form of Nazi apologetics. Armed with Opinions writes, I don't think they're the same, but I don't like either. I would argue, Armed with Opinions, that the reason why you don't like communism is because your conception of communism has been colored by the enemies of communism. Again, you live in a highly fascist society that has every reason to smear its enemies. And the primary enemy of capitalism is certainly communism. So that would be the argument that I would make. And I would encourage you to start looking at communism and start looking at communist ideas as well as communist societies with a more with an open heart and an open mind, in order to try to take their position and try to learn about them from the position of their side, right? That if all you do is learn about these societies from the position of their enemies, then of course you're going to have a dim opinion. I'll give you the clearest example I can possibly give you. of what I actually think is quite despicable, how we treat the Soviet Union. There was a period of time in the Soviet Union called what we call the Great Terror, right? Where political leaders in Sergei Kirov was a big one. Political leaders within the Politburo were assassinated. So there was an assassination, and this led to an investigation, and as well as a general clampdown by the political class, which I would call completely normal, right? It's completely normal that the political class would do an investigation and have a clampdown and hold trials. But if you learn about that from the position of the West, it's a dark and evil time, and it's proof that communism is tyrannical and authoritarian and oblique and dark, terrible. Oh, well, what a horrible. But when you actually look at it and from the position of the people who are experiencing it, and you actually think about it with an open heart for 30 seconds, you're like, yeah, it makes all the sense in the world that a political apparatus that experienced an assassination of high-level leadership would do an investigation and hold trials. And it makes complete and total sense. And it's also worth pointing out that when communist countries experience assassinations, they have trials and do investigations. When capitalist nations experience assassinations, they have world wars. Right? It's definitely worth pointing that out. So that's just one example of many examples. And of course you could get into the Great Leap Forward, the Holodomor, all of this stuff. That the moment you realize, the moment you just put into your mental space that, probably everything I've heard about this is coming from disingenuous liars who are willing to lie to me about enormous things directly to my face. The capitalist class is willing to stand in front of you right now and say Israel isn't starving Gazans. They're willing to lie to you directly to your face about something that you can literally live stream. You can literally connect to live streams where Gazans will tell you about the famine that they are currently experiencing at the hands of the Israelis. And the Biden administration has the audacity and the gall to stand in front of you and say it isn't happening. Well, if they're willing to lie to you about that, then they're definitely willing to lie to you about a historical situation that happened in a communist nation somewhere, right? They're definitely willing to lie to you. The Americans had a Cold War against the Soviet Union. Of course they're willing to lie to you about what was going on there. So, and the moment you put that kind of skepticism into your consciousness and into your heart, and you actually start to think to yourself, okay, hold on, the Russians and the Soviets were people. They were experiencing things. They had their own positions. They had their own thoughts. Let me think about this situation from their perspective. Let me put myself in their shoes for a minute. You can see pretty clearly that no, that's pretty normal. That's a pretty normal thing, right? And there's also often the case that the system of capital will just simply omit things that as soon as you see, wait a minute, I'll give you the best example of this I can think of right off the top of my head. There was a famine in China that killed millions of people. It was a horrible event, and it was because of communism. That communists did the Great Leap Forward in China, and it created a huge famine, and it was a horrible disaster, right? You know what they omit from that conversation? They omit the Vietnam War, the Korean War, the fact that Dwight D. Eisenhower and Nixon both threatened to drop nuclear bombs on China, that the Chinese were sending 300,000 troops into Vietnam, that Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia were devastated to the earth, that Korea lost 20% of its population and was turned to rubble, that the Chinese did the Great Leap Forward because they were terrorized, because they were in a state of total terror. So they thought, we've got to round up as many resources as we possibly can as fast as possible to fight this war, because they're going to drop fucking nukes on us, right? Yeah, so yeah, there was a bit of a famine that happened, for sure, because they were in this fucking terrorized panic against a demonic monster that was threatening to drop nukes on them, right? So capital likes to omit these things from this conversation. They like to pretend as though, oh, communists just did this because they're evil. And as soon as you put any amount of skepticism into your thinking, you can see that this is the case. CH, how you doing, my man? CH is going on a tear. Hold on, I've been talking for a minute, so I'm gonna read some of you guys' comments. You guys are very active today, man. It's nice. It makes my job really easy, honestly. Like, I've got articles and things, but boy, does it make it easy when you guys are active in the chat. Yeah, Transylvanian, on the point of Nazism and communism being the same. The Nazis openly and repeatedly designated the Soviets and the Bolsheviks as their arch enemy, pretty much from the very start. Even their anti-Semitism was rolled into and subordinated into this primary struggle via the myth of Judeo-Bolshevism. That's a really good point. June writes, read Against the Mainstream, Nazi Privatization in 1930s Germany by Germa Bell, if you want an idea of how big they were of the privatization of industry. Yeah. Transylvanian continues, the Bolshevik Revolution scared the living crap out of the ruling classes of Europe, and it was the primary reason for the capitalist class enabling of the rise of fascism. Exactly. June continues, the Nazis introduced state planning of the still privately owned industries late into World War II, but that was only because they were losing the war. CH comes in. How are you today, CH? If Jordan Peterson cares about it, don't care about it. That's right. Never clean up your room. Under no circumstances are you to clean up your room. Messy rooms. Messy rooms. Messy rooms. CH continues, don't equate fascism and communism in any sense. It's both historically wrong and helps fascists implement genocidal racism and other means of dividing the workers. CH continues, yes, only under extreme duress in 1944 did Nazis make women work in factories. They were promising livable one-household incomes as part of the pitch. You can hear good exact English translations of Hitler's and Goebbels' speeches in 1941 and to 44, and their pitches are exactly what today's centrists preach. China is communism, period. Most successful communist state, too big to mess with. Of course, they can make use of market mechanisms, but as communists, they know exactly when to put a lid on private power. Seems to me that from the very beginning, CH, Ben is correct. Ben chimes in and says, the Chinese government themselves does not describe their system as communism. Yes, they say it's socialism with Chinese characteristics, that they are moving towards communism, but they don't have a date on when they expect to see that. But they call it socialist with Chinese characteristics. And from the very beginning, it looks to me that the Chinese were willing to allow private industry in order to do manufacturing. So private owners would bring the means of production over to China, a major win for China in the first place, and then they would manufacture things. But the resource base of China is state-owned. And that seems to me how the Chinese Communists and the Chinese Communist Party has managed to maneuver and negotiate this period of time. That I've said this before on this channel, that the goal of the Chinese Communists is to weather this period of capitalist influx, which was a negotiated peace post the Vietnam War. Like, we remember the Vietnam War, right? Like, that's a thing that happened on China's border. And in order to negotiate a peace, the Chinese allowed foreign capital in. Well, their strategy seems to be, first of all, to get the means of production, which is a huge win for them, obviously. And then, but then to allow capitalist systems to do what capitalist systems do, which is collapse. And every single time one of these capitalist systems collapse within China, the Chinese seize it. They make the billionaire class, they make the ownership class of that business bail out the workers, right? They don't do a big bailout of the billionaires. They make the billionaires pay for the collapse. They seize any infrastructure that they need to seize. They ensure the workers are well taken care of and that everything's fine. And they it's a process of what I have come to call pruning the garden. That I think is the idea that they're moving forward. And let me be very clear, that's my idea. That's not coming out of China. I haven't heard anybody in China say this. They should, because this seems to be what they're doing, right? Is that they have in order to settle a peace with America over the Vietnam War, they have allowed foreign capital in, and as foreign capital collapses, as systems of capital are designed to do, they break those branches off, or they cut those plants, or they pull those weeds, and they throw them out of the garden. So there's a pruning of the garden that is happening in China right now, and as it prunes itself, and as it prunes itself, and as it prunes itself, its garden will simply grow fuller and brighter and bigger. And China right now is looking very, very, very powerful. Oh, this all reminds me. I actually have an article that I have really been meaning to read. Yeah, because I think it's a real teaching moment. I think there's a real teaching moment in this article that really shows you why the way the West thinks about economics and why the way the West thinks about politics generally is fraudulent and has no credibility anymore. Right? Just because the West has revealed itself as fraudulent doesn't mean that its proponents, that its acolytes and followers are going to give up the ghost. They're going to keep trying, right? They're going to keep trying to frame reality through their false ideology, right? And I feel like this article is really case in point. Paul writes, have you heard that Nazi Germany was more socialist than modern-day China? That's an embarrassing thing to say. Straight up. Like, I just don't think it's worth responding to. Just go ask the Jews what they think about that. So, from the Telegraph. For everybody who doesn't know, the Telegraph is essentially the UK's Fox News. So this is a far-right publication publishing this article. China's window of opportunity to take Taiwan will close soon. Xi Jinping will soon face his now or never moment. From Andrew Lilico. Not so long ago, there was a widespread assumption that China's economy, surpassing that of the United States to become the world's largest, was both inevitable and imminent. This was expected to be a major historical event, heralding a shift in geopolitical power to the east. This was not the first time in recent decades that an East Asian economic surpassing of the U.S. had been expected. In the 1970s and early 80s, there was much talk of how Japan's economy would become the world's largest, and many a sci-fi movie of the era imagined Japanese economic and cultural dominance in the future. So first paragraph, and we're already sort of revealing how Americans don't actually understand how economics works. Japan is a vassal state of the United States. There is absolutely no way that Japan could possibly outgrow America simply because it is so dramatically tied structurally to America's economy. That as Japan grows, so too does the United States. Just by the natural state of how the two are connected to one another. So it's structurally impossible for Japan to grow faster than the United States because as Japan grows, so too does the United States economy, right? That's what being a vassal means, right? And so already the dichotomy is false, right? It's a false analogy. Using Japan as an analogy for why China won't supersede America is a wrong-headed thing to do. Because China is not a vassal of the United States. The United States has tried, or would have liked, rather, to have made China a vassal state. And many Americans have wrongly thought that China was a vassal state. And many Marxists even have thought that China is a vassal state, but it's not true. China is not a vassal state to the United States. It is an independent nation with its own thoughts and its own ideas. The article continues. Yet, of course, this never happened. Is the case of China different? It increasingly appears not. Or at least if China's economy does have a period as the largest, that increasingly seems likely to be very short-lived. So he uses an article, or he uses a source here from source Capital Economics, which, if you follow regularly at the Canadian Commie, you know that capitalists don't understand economics. They think that the heart of economics is financialization, whereas Marxists understand that the heart of economics is actually manufacturing, right? The ability to produce things, the means of production. So when they're measuring this, they're literally measuring like bank accounts or the stock market, right? They don't actually say, they actually do. CE projections, market exchange rate. So literally how much money passes between rich people. That's what they're measuring right here. So it's a financialized measurement of the economy. Who cares? Who cares what your fake funny money is being exchanged for? Right? That's not what the heart of your economy actually is. Like, just because Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk trade millions of dollars between one another as they jerk off over who gets to go to space the fastest, doesn't mean you actually have an economy. The article continues. There are a number of reasons why. Partially, there is a natural rhythm to economic catch-up for countries that begin quite poor, as China did and Japan before it. An initial generation or two may be willing to work long hours for relatively modest pay by international standards, because even those levels of remuneration seem fantastically high to workers whose parents lived at a subsistence level off the land. This means that the fruits of economic growth can be used largely for investment, because even modest enhancements in consumption feel like riches beyond imagining. See how they are individualizing the economy and treating it as though investment is the primary driver of the economy, right? See how they have said, like he outright just said it, that individual people within China had more money to invest, and that's the primary driver of the economy. Forget about the plans that the CCP have made. Forget about the plans of the Communist Party. Forget about the ideas of how to grow and where to go. Forget about the central planning. Forget about any of that. Like, what matters is that subsistence farmers have more income because they worked extra hours, and they're able to invest it in a stock market. That's what actually matters, right? But at some point, as wealth increases, the expectations of younger citizens change, and they demand more resources being devoted to consumption and more of their time being spent in leisure. Also, rapid economic development leads to developmental dead ends and errors, with infrastructure built that is never used, borrowing mistakes that create debt overhangs, and even sometimes corruption and criminal gangs as new wealth creates opportunities. So now he's just describing capitalism, right? Because if all you have is a capitalist conception of the world, then all you think of is capitalism, and you can't. And if you're refusing to break free from it, if you're refusing to actually observe things through a Marxist lens, and if you've never read Marx and you don't understand Marx, then all you see is the capitalist financialization system. And certainly, China has a financial system. They just understand that's not the center of power. They just understand that the center of power is actually within the means of production and its productive capability, right? And China has shown this over and over and again, that it's actually willing to collapse systems, financial systems, for the benefit of the workers, for the benefit of reality, for the benefit of the real economy, which is people and their environment. Fatty Fat Cake over on Twitch. What are we talking about? We are talking. We are reading an article from the Telegraph, which is Fox News UK, basically, to illustrate how wrong-headed the capitalists actually think about things and how their analysis can't be trusted, right? Like, this argument so far is very cleanly the argument of United States capital, right? The argument that power is derived from financialization. Power is derived from who has money, and that money is the center of power. Whereas we understand as Marxists that money is not the center of power. Money is a medium of exchange that can be used in order to let's say, incentivize productivity, but productivity is what matters, and who owns the means of production is what matters. And the Chinese have shown over and over again that should finances and the means of production and reality come in conflict with one another, they choose productivity every time, and they choose the means of production every time, because that's reality. That's the real economy, right? Whereas the Americans choose financialization every time, right? And because they choose financialization every time, their society declines. And because China chooses productivity every time, their society ascends. Another consequence of economic development will become especially acute for China: a reduced birth rate. This is a hilarious point to make because the United States also has a reduced birth rate. The difference is that China chose to have a reduced birth rate because of concerns of overpopulation. They have a population of 1.5 billion people, right? They're very concerned. Deng was very concerned. That's why they did the one-child policy. So their reduced birth rate was done purposefully through debate and planning, whereas our reduced birth rate is happening because we've put plastic in our testicles and because we have reduced the living standard for Americans so much that they can't even afford to pay their own rent, let alone a child's rent. As well as the normal pattern of more educated and wealthier women achieving more reproduction control, China had more specific measures to attempt to limit its birth rate in its rapid population expansion phase, including the notorious, you can't just say the one-child policy, it's got to be the notorious one-child policy. Its population has already peaked at about 1.4 billion and now falling and projected to fall to around 1.2 billion over the next 30 years, and then to crash to 600 million by 2100. I mean, source required, like, what's your plan? But the Chinese know this. Like, they understand that. Like, I love how the West always talks about China as if the Chinese are unaware of these things and unaware that that's the trajectory and the projection and what they're planning to do, right? Like, they know. They understand. They're doing it on purpose, right? The U.S. population, by contrast, is expected to continue to grow from about 340 million now to over 380 million in 30 years' time, dropping only slightly to about 370 million by 2100. So let's be clear. By 2100, according to this article, the American population will be 370 million, and the Chinese population will still be 600 million. Almost double. What's the problem here, bud? What's the problem? To make up for that difference in population growth, China's GDP per capita, the measurement that the guy that invented the GDP said not to use for this purpose, the guy that invented GDP as a measurement said explicitly, don't use it to measure your economic strength. This is just a way to measure your gross domestic product. Like, that's what it's for. But if this is the backbone of your economic thinking, no, don't do that. That's a bad idea. And here we are. China's GDP per capita would need to grow by nearly 1% per annum faster than the US's for the next 30 years, and nearly 1.5% faster than the US from then until 2100. Funnily enough, that's exactly what's going on. China's GDP is at 3.5%, and every single time the IMF or the World Bank looks at it, they actually upgrade it. It was initially 3.1, and then it was 3.2, and then it was 3.3, and then it was 3.4, right? The United States is at like 1.2, 1.3, right? And every time anybody looks at it, they actually decline it. It actually goes down, right? So that's basically exactly what's happening. This guy's saying, like, to make up for the difference, China is going to have to grow faster than the United States, like it's doing. Cool. This may be possible in the short term, remembering that Americans don't think past this quarter, right? Americans don't plan. They worship the free market, or chaos, as I like to call it, right? Let the free market decide. Let chaos reign. You tell me the difference between these statements. So when Americans say, oh yeah, we definitely perceive what's going to happen in the long term, what a fucking joke. No Westerner anywhere has the right to say they know what's going to happen in 50 years, let alone by the end of this year, let alone by the end of this quarter. Because they don't. They plan for this quarter and nothing else. They don't give a shit. They tell you they don't give a shit. But all of a sudden when it comes to China, we're the longest term thinkers. We plan in the long term. We care so much about the long term because we are credible and have a credible economic system that collapses once every 5 to 7 years. Although China's international trade position suffered significantly in the aftermath of COVID, with the gap between its GDP and the US widening from about $5 trillion in 2021 to about $10 trillion in 2023, it appears to be benefiting from some fairly shrewd economic repositioning with respect to the Russo-Ukraine war. I love it. Yeah, they decided to work with Russia instead of against Russia like we thought they would, because we're very smart. Projections last year from economic forecaster CEBR had China managing about 1% faster GDP per capita growth than the US for some time, allowing it to briefly overtake the US economy by the late 2030s, though the US re-overtakes within a couple of decades as the demographic effects kick in. I love it. It's literally like, nuh-uh. Nuh-uh, we're definitely going to do it. You watch. We've always predicted things correctly. Here in the United States, every prediction we've ever made has always been correct. In this one, it will be no different. Completely correct. Absolutely. Because we base things off of a measurement that we were told by the guy that invented it not to do. Those projections, however, assume U.S. GDP per capita only grows at its recent rate of about 1% per annum. That could be too pessimistic, given the effects on productivity growth we are already seeing from AI and the stream of other new technologies. For example, green tech, driverless cars, lab-grown meat, cancer vaccines, that appear on the cusp of widespread adoption. If there is only slightly faster U.S. growth, China never overtakes. So his argument is that, well, the United States economy will also grow because of all this technological advancement that China definitely won't have. China won't have access to green tech, that it's the leader, the industry leader in, driverless cars, that it's the industry leader in, lab-grown meat, that it's the industry leader in, cancer vaccines, that it's the industry leader in. Like, China's the industry leader in these industries. And you're basically pitting your hopes and dreams on the hopes that the United States economy is going to grow faster than China because China won't use technology that it is actually the industry leader in. Hard to take you seriously, bud. Really, really hard to take this shit seriously. I genuinely think that they are hoping that people have stopped reading the article by this point, and that they don't have the wherewithal to be like, won't China also use that technology? Like, if it works for you, why won't they do it? Welcome to America. As well as the economic implications, these trends may also have geopolitical consequences. We may be reaching the point of China's nearest approach to U.S. economic power, and the distance may grow quite rapidly again once that point is reached. That may mean, for example, that whereas there had until recently... Dude, listen to that sentence. Dude, incidentally, this article was about Taiwan and how Xi Jinping is trying to take Taiwan. Hasn't yet mentioned it. We're in the last paragraph. Good writing, bro. Good writing. This is what's getting published in capitalist media. Okay, let me read this again. Holy shit, listen to this. This made it past an editorial desk. That may mean, for example, that whereas there had until recently been a working assumption that China's growing military might would mean its eventual absorption of Taiwan was only a matter of time, the window of opportunity may rapidly be closing. What a sentence. If China does not take Taiwan soon, its power relative to the US may start to decline so rapidly that seizing Taiwan quickly becomes implausible. Xi Jinping may soon face a now or never moment. What the fuck are you talking about, bro? What an unpersuasive cope-based article, man. Oh yeah, the demographics thing is such a cope for sure. Dude, this article, big cope. Big cope, man. Who is the author? Thank you, Watson. Good to see you, by the way, bud. The author, Andrew Lilico. Also, other headlines from Andrew Lilico. Rishi has scored an economic triumph, and labor will be seething. Russia may have to hand back Ukrainian territory after the war to fix its economy. People will flee the country rather than pay any more tax. It's now clear, ousting Truss killed the Tories. Mark my words, tax cuts won't fuel inflation. Was Liz Truss right all along? Hard-working, tax-paying migrants still push welfare budgets upwards. Russia simply can't win a war against Europe. The mathematics are inexorable. In this case, he is actually correct. Russia would not be able to win a war against Europe. That's why Russia's not interested in that. Russia should know that overextended military can break its economy. What a fucking hack. Holy cow, dude. This guy's publishing? Like, what a goddamn hack. Holy shit, dude. Yeah, Andrew Lilico, a good guide to what is exactly wrong. Yeah, when you have no, when you're not literate, when you don't have like an economic or geopolitical literacy, right? When your basis of economic and geopolitical thought is rooted in financialization and the primacy of the financial sector, right? Like, I've said it over and over and over again. America worships money. Money is its prime focus. Whoever has the most money is the king, right? Forget about what your country actually looks like. Forget about where your workers are at. Forget about what infrastructure they're dealing with. Forget about, reality. Don't need to observe reality. Don't need to observe material conditions. Don't need to observe history. You don't need to do a historical dialectic, right? Oh, that guy has the most money, therefore he is good. That's as far as these people think, and that is literally how they measure success, right? So forget about what China's cities actually look like. Forget about the Belt and Road Initiative. Forget about the massive infrastructure projects. Forget about the fact that its workers are making more money year over year and that wages are going up in China. Forget about the stability. Forget about the community building. Forget about the fact that the Chinese people are enraptured with their government, as high as 90% approval rating. Forget about any of that. Forget about all of that. Well, who has the most money? Who's making money from this thing? Right? How would these guys talk about a society that literally said, we don't really need money anymore. We don't need those systems anymore. So we're just going to do away with money. Right? Or how would it deal with a citizenry that was basically just treating money as an afterthought? That basically just said, oh, we have access to all of these goods and all of these services and all of these systems are in place and we interact with those systems. So why do we need money? Like, this has been a communist idea. Lenin wrote about it. Trotsky wrote about it. That money as a concept withers away. That if you actually build stable systems that people rely on and they know they can rely on them, eventually there just comes a point where people realize that, like, this moment of money exchange isn't really necessary, is it? We don't really need it. That money as a concept fades out of the consciousness of the people, and that it remains something that accountants do in the back room, right? That literally there's just some bureaucrat in the government building that's basically like, okay, well, these exchanges happen, this exchanges happen, and the only reason they're doing it is to just make sure everything's in balance. And if things fall out of balance, they know where it's fallen out of balance, right? But citizens don't need to know anything about it. Citizens don't need to interact with it. And in many ways, money becomes just essentially a measurement that we're already using in the back rooms, right? That we don't care anymore about it. What would a guy like Andrew Lilico say about a society that regarded money in such a manner? How would he measure who's best? How would he measure the success of an economy if that economy was not being measured via money? Oh, Paul, no, dude. First of all, Paul, do not use GDP as a measurement of economic growth. Let's just do it. No. Paul, this is something that I'm going to give you a hard no on, okay? Like, you gotta take a look at the thing. China, walk around. Where should we go, guys? You know what, man? I always like Shanghai. You know, let's go to Chongqing. Always a popular one. Let's just get that done, and then do 3, 2, 1. Welcome to China. So your conception of China is wrong. I understand why people have this conception of China, because all our media shows us is pictures of China from like 1942, right? Like you don't get an image of China, of modern day China. You don't get to see what modern day China actually looks like. The idea that China is poor, they just have a lot of people, is fabulously wrong. Phenomenally wrong. Like, wrong on a level that I can't even begin to tell you how wrong it is. China is building infrastructure at an extraordinary rate. They have the wages of the working class in China is going up at an extreme rate. The success of the nation is obvious the moment you take a look at it and the moment you actually pay attention to it, right? The Chinese citizens are actually over the moon about all of this that's happened. China has built what is called the Belt and Road Initiative. Okay, so try looking for a Chinese city from the countryside. Dude, do you want to go to an American city? And let's be nice. Let's go to one of the nicer ones. Right? I think it's nice. Right? I think it's nice. I'm sure we won't see any homeless people. Right? So, Paul, I don't think you're actually engaging meaningfully with reality anymore. And I really would like you to understand that. Okay? Like, I genuinely think that what you have just said to me and what you've just shown me, it can only really be described as xenophobic, right? And I really think that you need to acknowledge that, and you really need to see that in a serious way. That you take a look at this and you think to yourself, amazing city, incredible city, the best city. We've got the best cities, incredible cities, amazing cities, but you see a Chinese city, and it's all just apologetics, right? It's all like, oh yeah, of course it looks good. That's where the money is. Like, it's just kind of an odd thing that you've done. So, Paul, again, I don't think you're meaningfully engaging with reality. There's a book that I really highly suggest that everybody actually take a look at. It's called Sacrifice Zones. It's Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt by Chris Hedges, where he goes to what he calls the sacrifice zones in America, the poor sections of America, and he, with the illustrator Joe Sacco, they go through the sections of America that have become impoverished. Just because you're refusing to engage with it and you don't actually see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. The poverty that exists in sections of America make the poorest sections of China look extremely rich. Like, if you want me to look at the poor sections of China, you're going to have to tell me where they are so that I can see them. Yeah, it's pretty... Paul, I'm going to be really straight with you, man. I don't think you're engaging with reality in a manner that can be described as serious. And really, okay, congratulations. I don't think you're engaging seriously with reality. Like, show me something like this in China. Like, for real, man. Like, show me something like Skid Row in China. Where is Skid Row in China? You know about Skid Row, right? You know, is this not going to pop up? Like, here's just the streets of Philadelphia. Like, show me something like this in China. Transylvanian writes, it is true that the countryside is still much less developed than the cities. Yeah, I mean, that's to be expected, honestly. But the infrastructure expansion in recent decades into these rural areas has been gargantuan. Yeah, absolutely. Watson writes, is Paul an American exceptionalist? It seems to be the case. Yeah, Paul. Like, that's trash. There's many drug addicts in the streets. Yeah, there they are. This is Philadelphia. Like, I don't think you're meaningfully engaging with reality. And I really have to start asking you why. Like, why is it that you don't want to engage with reality in a meaningful way? That like, there's so many different positions or different ways for me to go about this. I really want viewers to understand this is literally the first time I have replaced this tactic with another tactic. Or an old tactic with this tactic. You guys remember the old tactic. This is a new one. So I'm going into uncharted territory. So you think 340 million Americans live that way? No. But I do think Americans live that way. Like, here they are. Show me this in China. Where is this in China? Are you in favor of the legalization of all drugs and the expansion of this situation? But what do you think can be done about those people in the streets and addicts? Do you think the government could economically do something about it? Of course they could. They absolutely could. Like, drug addiction comes about because of economic decline. When people don't have anything else to live for, they find something to live for. And what they find to live for is drugs. If you want these people off of the streets, and I assume you do, right? I assume you do. Then, well, Paul, you had said earlier that you're a Christian, right? Well, then the way to help these people is to give money to the poor, is to help people get back on their feet, help people find stable housing, help people reintegrate into the economy. Because the reason why these situations are like this, the reason why these circumstances exist, is because these people have been ejected from the economy. They have been abandoned by the economy. And they are just remnants of that abandonment. That under the system of capital, the capitalists would prefer that these people just go die. But they're not going to go do that. And they're not just going to disappear, even though that would be an improvement from the perspective of the capitalist class. They don't need money. They need to be treated because all they think and live for is the drug. Left home, they're just living like zombies, seeking pleasure from drugs. So, I think that this is a popular but inaccurate way of thinking about the situation. That the issue that these people are facing with is economic despair. That the economic system around them has abandoned them, right? That when you create large sections of your economy where people cannot be integrated into the economy, they can't get access to resources, they can't get a job, they can't sell themselves into the wage slave economy that exists in America, they can't find success with that. Well, America doesn't have social systems, certainly not adequate social systems, to be able to help them get to a position where they have stability. And so they end up in homelessness, they end up in poverty, they end up in desperation as they have been economically abandoned. Okay? They and once they are economically abandoned, they realize that they don't really have anything to live for. There's nothing here for them anymore. And so they become wandering vagrants, and they try to find any joy that they can anywhere that they can. And where is that going to be? Drugs. So you are saying that freedom also comes with freedom of this. Drugs. There's a really interesting study that I highly advise everybody look at. Yeah. When you individualize and when you become sort of anti-Christian, right? Like it's like, Paul, the position that you're putting forward, you say that you're a Christian, but your position is anti-Christ, right? Like it's anti-Christian. That what you are witnessing is the results of poverty and desperation, right? And people are not just going to die quietly and die out of sight, right? They're not just going to be silent, and they're not just going to do nothing, right? And moreover, they're not going to care about your judgment of them, and nor should they, right? Because instead of saying, oh goodness, our system has failed these people and we need to reintegrate these people into the system economically to give them a foundation on which to stand, instead of saying that, you're waving your finger at them and saying they shouldn't do drugs, they're bad people for doing drugs. No, Paul, I'm going to stop you dead in your tracks, and I'm going to tell you right now, you are in flat earther territory, and I can say that very cleanly, and I need you to engage with reality on this point, okay? Because their brain is chemically dependent on the drug, there is literally no evidence of this. Literally. That there was a test, or there was a study that was done where a rat was put in a cage and it was given water or heroin, and it did heroin until it died, and they said that proves chemical dependency is real, right? Well, later on, another scientist said, well, wait a minute, what you did is you isolated a rat, gave it nothing to do except drugs, and so in its desperation and in its despair and boredom, it did drugs until it died. Well, what if we take a rat out of a heaven for rats, where there's like a community of rats, and there's a bunch of rats around, and they have all the food, and they play, and everything's fine for the rats. Well, what they did is they took a rat out of that circumstance that I just described, and they recreated the original experiment, where they isolated the rat, and the same thing started to happen. It was just doing the heroin-laced water, and then they took that rat and they put it back in with all the other rats, and it just never did drugs again. It reintegrated itself in the society, and it played with the rats and it ate the food. And then they even went so far to do the experiment in the community of rats, where they took the water and they took the heroin-laced water, and rats would try the heroin-laced water, but then they would never do it again, right? And the conclusion was that what matters, and what mattered to these rats, was that they had other things to do, and that they were integrated in a larger society, and that they could get connected, right? That they could be connected. Paul writes, you really think everybody would just leave that if you gave them a job or money to buy food? Well, no, I think they should have an apartment. That's what I think they should really get initially. And all the studies show that's the case, by the way. Anytime we take homeless people and we give them a place to live, and we give them food and we give them access to resources, they reintegrate into the society. Like, Finland has literally done this, has just straight up proven that this is the case. Like, all of the evidence shows that this is true. That, sure, you'll find that one person to confirm your own bias, right? But by and large, across the board, most people reintegrate themselves back into the society because they want to be integrated in the society. They don't want to be isolated. They just are isolated, and it's not a moral failing. It's a systemic issue. It's an issue of capitalism and how the system of capital creates poverty and creates homelessness. But there is no evidence for your claim. That's the issue, okay? That's the issue. There isn't any evidence to support your claim that you're not engaging meaningfully with reality. You are deciding that these people are have a moral failing, or you are deciding that they have a chemical connection to this drugs in order to send cops at them, essentially. You know, the way Christ would want you to. As opposed to acknowledging that the reason why they're in the position that they are in is because the system of capital has abandoned them. And you are upset that they refuse to die quietly. That really is the truth. I've definitely triggered Paul. Paul, do you think Christ would be happy with your pro-poverty and pro-homelessness positions? Like, your solution is to round these people up with cops, right? Do you think that's what Christ would want? I mean, capitalism is a large system that we're part of. So, yes, capitalism intersects with a lot of issues. The system of capital is definitely responsible for the poverty that exists in the society, without a doubt. It's sort of delusional to say otherwise. Like, the fact that there is a maintained unemployment rate should tell you that's the truth. Like, I could read you a Federal Reserve document that outright says that they're trying to raise unemployment on purpose, if you like. Like, I don't want to look at this anymore. I'd like to get back to a civilized country. Let's take a look. Let's go back over here. Let's go to... You know what, man? I really want to go to, like... I want to be super, super touristy right now. Beijing, Shanghai, Ningbo. Yeah, Hanoi. Let's go to Hanoi. There's nothing Hanoiing about that. Yeah. A little bit more rural atmosphere. A little bit more rural. For sure. I'm in for it. Hanoi is Vietnam, though, isn't it? Am I stupid? I'm being stupid right now, I feel. Somebody's going to correct me. It's fine. I just like going to places, dude. I just like... Paul writes, I think God would be happy that I'm treating people. So you're having cops round people up and putting them into facilities, and then basically saying to those people, you're a bad person for doing drugs, so we're going to put you into rehab, basically, for a period of time. Okay. Giving back to families. I don't understand that comment at all. Job program. Okay, so you're giving the people who you've just arrested off the street and put into facilities a job at what, McDonald's, right? Okay, and then and life reestablishment. It's sort of a meaningless phrase that doesn't mean anything. So, are you giving them an apartment? Do they get an apartment out of this deal? Right? I mean, we're in Hanoi right now, dude. Like, Paul, like, every time you comment on these cities, like, I can tell really, and I think you really need to think on this. Like, I really do. I'm spending a lot of time with you, bud, because I genuinely am concerned, right? It's very clear that you're xenophobic. Like, it's really, really obvious that you're a xenophobic person. Just the comments that you have for these places that we're going, like, it's really, really clear that you think less of these people. That somebody asked the question outright, and I'll just ask it. Like, do you think that these people are subhuman? Do you think that they're lesser than somehow? Right? Do you think that they are living in squalor or something? Like, we literally just walked through like a homeless encampment in Philadelphia. Like, it's just very like unsettling, I think would be the phrase that I would use. Watson writes, the accumulation of wealth at one pole is therefore at the same time accumulation of misery, agony of toil, slavery, ignorance, brutality, mental degradation at the opposite pole. Karl Marx. Thank you. Yeah, there is intrinsically nothing wrong with job programs, but like, to me, it is something of a Band-Aid solution, right? Like, people need houses, people need resources, people need access to just stability. They just need access to basic stability, right? That what you're doing by creating a jobs program is you're putting a middleman in between the resources that they need, right? Which is what the system of capital and what the political system always does, right? That they don't stand up and say, we're going to make sure that you have access to food and shelter. We're going to make sure that you have access to stability. They always say, we're going to make sure you have access to jobs, right? Like, what happens in a society if we automate everything? Is it jobs then? Is it a good job if you basically stand and stare at a hole all day? Is that a good job? Like, when are we actually going to just start thinking about, like, people having access to basic resources? And like why don't we just say people should have access to housing in the same way that they should have access to health care? Right? I know that's a difficult conception for Americans to understand because they don't have access to health care like the rest of the civilized world. Right? The rest of the civilized world has universal healthcare systems because that's the best way to do it, to ensure that you have a civilized country. But if you don't live in a civilized country, right, you hear the concept that like people should have access to housing. It's a very foreign concept to you. Zefro comes in. Strong comment, Zefro. The only time xenophobia is good is when you're dealing with xenomorphs. That's goddamn right. You got to deal with those xenomorphs. Paul says, yeah, they need temporary resources until they can, after treatment, get a job, get back on their feet, and their life. This is the more correct policy. Good. Like, good. Like, I'm glad to hear you say that. I am actually really glad to hear you say that, because my perception and my thinking of this has always been people who are living in these dire straits just need a place to live and just need access to basic resources. Right? That's what they need and that's what they want. And what we've seen over and 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 over again is that when people get access to these things, they become members of the society. They reintegrate themselves with the economy because they want to, because it's a better life to do so. And the sort of myth making that occurs, the sort of myth making that exists, where we're constantly fighting against the imagination of the rich. And rich people constantly want you to believe that their imagination of the poor matters more than the reality of the poor. Because the reality of the poor is that when you give these people the resources they need, they use it to better their lives. They want to have access to stable housing. They want to have access to a community. They want to integrate themselves. They want to have friends. They want to live a decent life, right? They want to live a stable life. Everybody wants to live a stable life. And what people see are people who have been completely destabilized, and have been discarded from the economy, and who cannot find stability. And so the solution to their issue is not send cops at them, or put them in prison, or put them in even rehab centers. It's to make sure that they have stable living conditions, and make sure that they have a stable place to be able to operate from. And if we're not going to provide that very basic thing for them, then I don't think that we have any right to judge them at all. I don't think that we have the right to ask anything of these people if we're not willing to provide even the most basic of resources for them. And the issue, of course, that we're facing when I get talking this way is that basic resource is not offered to the majority of the people. Food and shelter are withheld from the public. We withhold food and shelter from people unless you sell yourself to an owner. If you are willing to sell yourself to an owner, or if you are capable of selling yourself to an owner, then you get access to food and shelter. But if you are not capable of selling yourself to an owner, or if all of the owners simply leave your town, which is essentially what happened over the neoliberal period, that all of the manufacturing got ripped out of your communities and shipped overseas. And we're basically just told, go deal with that. Go deal with that. Well, we're dealing with it. And how many people deal with it is by collapsing in the streets and doing drugs. Because they can't find a job. There is no employment to be had. They can't find an owner who's willing to take them in so that they can get access to food and shelter. That's the reality of the capitalist system. And that's the reason why it generates homelessness. And the reason why it generates poverty. Because owners don't want to hire these people. Owners have extracted the means of production, have extracted jobs out of these communities, and have sent them overseas to exploit cheap labor over there. And it's created a homelessness crisis, which has resulted in a drug crisis, and incidentally, a suicide crisis. And if we wanted to get serious about confronting these serious issues, well, then the people we should be confronting are the people responsible for creating those conditions. And that would be the capitalist class, who extracted the means of production from the society, who deindustrialized America, who offshore not just jobs, but also profit, who offshore and ship finances into offshore accounts, and refuse to allow any of that to, quote-unquote, trickle down. No, Paul, there isn't a job. There isn't a job. Like, it isn't there. Like I really need you to understand this. The job isn't there. It's not there. Like, you can continue pretending like it is not. Like, it genuinely is not the case. And what you end up with is you end up with 10 people competing for one job. Well, what do you think happens to the other 9? How do you think that actually goes? You really think the cause of this is joblessness? Of course it is. What else would it be? Like, when you tear out a manufacturing base and ship it somewhere else, you remove jobs. Like, and if your economy is based on the idea that everybody gets access to jobs, yeah, I really got to start asking you, Paul, like, what country do you live in, my man? Like, if you live in a community that has a factory in it, and that factory shuts down and leaves, what do you think happens to the people? Where do they go? What do you think they do? How do you think it actually goes for them? Like, do you think they just magically start working some other job? For who? Where? Like, the way the system is structured. And I think your confusion... I think that your confusion is because you just seem to think that jobs exist and people go get jobs. And your confusion stems from not really understanding the structure of the society that you live in. That it is actually a structural issue, right? And that there's a major structural issue at play. That structural issue is that the primary beneficiaries of your labor is an ownership class. That capitalists, owners, own the means of production. And they own businesses. They own factories. They own fields. And this is a small minority of people in the society. And we, the working class, are put in a position, because we don't own anything, right? We certainly don't own the means of production. Because we don't own anything, we're put in a position where we have to sell ourselves to those owners, right? Well, the owners can just leave places. They can just leave. And they do leave. And they have left over the neoliberal period. They've extracted the means of production. Like, Detroit essentially collapsed because of the abandonment by the capitalist class. Unemployment spiked dramatically. And what jobs should these people work? Yeah, well, from Watson. Well, re-factory closings. Paul should look at the drug problem in Detroit, Cleveland, Youngstown, Ohio, Buffalo, New York, Camden, New Jersey. Camden, New Jersey's a real big one. Hamilton, Ontario. Yeah. I highly advise. Paul, what I want you to look up, in fact, I'll bring it up myself. I really suggest that you do this, okay? Like, really, I highly encourage you. Please, genuinely consider looking up Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt. Let's see if I can find. First of all, Chris Hedges is brilliant. I highly suggest looking for Chris Hedges because he's a brilliant speaker. This is the cover of it. So, oh, come on, just show me the picture. Why is Amazon always... Why is my mouse causing me problems? So this book... Can I get... Actually, this is it. Yeah, I'll just read this. From Chapter 3, Days of Devastation, Welsh, West Virginia. Larry Gibson was born on the mountain and spent his boyhood there. There were once 60 families clustered around the mountain, along with a small general store and a church. Gibson's father was a coal miner, who had his leg shattered in 1956 in a mine collapse. The coal company did not pay any benefits. The bills piled up. The family sold its furniture. The house was seized, and for a few months Larry and his parents camped out under a willow tree. Gibson remembers that as a young boy he came upon his father during this time, a man who always seemed to him a tower of strength, sobbing. The Gibsons, like the families of thousands of other coal miners who in the 1950s could no longer find work as the mines were mechanized and diesel and oil replaced coal, were forced out of the mountains. They went to Cleveland, where Larry's father found work in a barrel factory. He later worked for Ford. Gibson moved back to the mountain after he retired from the General Motors on disability. By the time he returned as a middle-aged man, the land of his boyhood was barely recognizable. His family's 500 acres had shrunk to 50. Old claims to mineral rights underground, many of them deeded by ancestors who could not read or write, gave coal companies the ability to seize the land. The spine of the Appalachian Mountains is being obliterated to gouge out the seams of black coal. The constant, daily explosions at the edge of his property, which in one typical week in West Virginia equals the cumulative power of the blast over Hiroshima, rains showers of rocks down on his property. We walk among the graves of his family cemetery on the crest of the hill. Coal operatives in the late 1980s stole more than 120 headstones in an effort to erase the face of the cemetery and open it up for mining. These vandalized grave sites are now marked by simple wooden crosses. We stop at the grave for Larry's brother Billy, who died in 2004. His stone reads, "Back to the mountains for which you loved, an eternal peace that had eluded you." What Chris Hedges does, and what Joe Sacco illustrates in the book Days of Destruction and Days of Revolt, are the sacrifice zones that exist across America. And Watson lists many of them. Detroit, Cleveland, Youngstown, Ohio, Buffalo, New York, Camden, New Jersey, Hamilton, Ontario. That there are sections of America that have been abandoned and have abandoned the people who live there. And that abandonment is in fact accelerating and expanding. So I really, really highly advise and strongly advise for you to learn more about the subject that we're discussing, to pursue this book, Chris Hedges, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt. If this does not show you and does not open your eyes to the reality of what is going on across America, then I don't think you genuinely care. And I don't think you're actually interested in it. So I think I'm going to leave that there, because I think that pursuit is going to be more successful for you than anything else that I can have to say. God bless. Good luck. What has been going on in my chat? What has been going on with my chat? Long story short, people have basic needs. Yeah, some of those are material, some are social. We need community. Yeah, wow, what a novel concept. Yeah. Joe writes, it's the individual responsibility trope. Yes, that's a factor, but it goes deeper than many are willing or able to understand. Yes, I knew it. Hanoi is Vietnam. Of course, of course. I gotta tell you, though, what a beautiful place. I gotta tell, we're walking around Hanoi right now, and, like, yeah, it looks poorer than China for sure, but, like, I don't know, dude. I grew up in, like, a small town, rural Portage la Prairie, Manitoba. It didn't look like this. Like, this makes Portage la Prairie look like a dusty, kind of forgotten shithole. Like, this looks really lovely. I really love the trees. I love how well treed it is. I love how colorful it is. I think that it definitely needs, like, people to come through and, like, a beautification project, sure. But that probably involves getting resources they don't have access to. Although recently Vietnam signed a pretty strong trade agreement with China. So Hanoi could very quickly start to accelerate its growth. Like, there are lots of places that are there are lots of neighboring countries that have been looking at China with a skeptical eye, obviously. India and Japan spring to mind as they've created something of an alliance in order to hopefully contain and balance China. But other places have looked at China and thought to themselves, why don't we do that? How come we look like this and they look like that? Why don't we grow? Why don't we build? Why don't we get that same kind of productivity in here? How do we do it? What can we do? CH writes, if we laugh at the hilarious ways AI dreams up to whack US senators, we will know it's not a threat to what's going on. Yeah. Karma is an important concept, wholly compatible with communism. It set back communism to fight with Buddhists in most countries. Buddhists can be co-opted. I mean, there's not a solution in and of themselves. Of course, stable housing is a necessity, right? You can't even really get, let alone hold a job without stable housing in most modern societies. Yeah, that's absolutely the truth. There's like a vicious cycle that you can get caught in, right? If you don't have housing, that you can't get hired, and if you don't, and if you can't get hired, then you can't get housing, right? That they kind of feed into one another. Like you've got to show an employer that you've got a mailing address, right? Like if you don't have a mailing address, then you can't get hired. And if you can't get hired, then you can't get a mailing address. Isaac writes, I went to LA 2 years ago and I was sad about the homelessness crisis I saw. Complete families with children, including professionals who can't afford the rent. Yeah, that's happening here in Toronto as well. I've seen interviews with people who have like good, well-meaning, not doing drugs, right? They just, circumstances hit them and came their way. Like, I have had moments in my life where I see how that could have gone, right? Like over COVID, when COVID hit, I got laid off from my job, right? I think to myself, like, if I had been living in a state in America and I got laid off like that, well, who was hiring over the COVID period? Nobody, right? So nobody was hiring over the COVID period. If I had got laid off like that in like Colorado or Alabama, right, there wouldn't have been anything for me, right? I would have lost my house. I would have been homeless, for sure. Like that's a dead certainty as far as I'm concerned. I find myself to be quite grateful for the fact that didn't happen to me, and that it was actually the Liberals with the CERB, which was a basic income that they then copped out on and dismantled in front of our very eyes. I would have actually respected the Liberals had they been like, this is now a basic income, we're keeping this in place, but they dismantled it. Because I think they realized, oh, wait a minute, we're actually capitalists. Another reason why I don't, like, anytime a basic income guy stands up, I'm like, yeah, what are you talking about? They literally dismantled that. What makes you think they're going to do that? Watson says, watch Soft White Underbelly if you want to see what the system has done to people. Watson says, I see the pseudo-leftist mafia has started on the Rational National. I mean, like, the Rational National is like progressive liberalism, right? And that's essentially his position. He'll look at a situation and he'll take a good take and have the right take, but then he basically just shakes his head and is like, we can do better. And I'm like, we should have a revolutionary movement. That's what we should have. Like, enough of this bullshit where we're like, let's trust in electoralism. Yeah, okay, right? That's getting us places. Upset Walrus 420. Politics streamers confuse me. Why is that? What confuses you? Also, Upset Walrus says switch to a work from home job just for COVID. Yeah, good for you, bud. Like, you are not the universe. Oh, Prevmar writes, you had to pay back your CERB. Yeah, I knew somebody who had to pay back some of the CERB. Brutal. Like, really, really, really brutal. Evil, if you ask me. Like, we went through a major extraction of wealth during the COVID period. $3 trillion was transferred from the poor to the rich over the COVID period. And then the governments have the audacity to turn around and say, oh, hey, you know that thing that we did as an emergency measure over the CERB? You have to pay that back. I'm actually more or less of the opinion that we actually have a pretty major class action lawsuit on our hands. That if all of these people who paid back the CERB or were told to pay back the CERB got together and actually made the argument that, like, us accepting the CERB did not include this concept, right? This wasn't considered a loan. Like, we were told this was an emergency measure and that everybody should apply for it and that the government would sort it out, and now we're being told we've got to pay it back? Fuck you. I actually think there's a really major class action lawsuit right there, and that if all of those people got together, they could get remuneration from the government from it, because it's like the government didn't say anything about paying it back. They actually made it explicitly clear that this was going to just be us giving out the money to people in need, and then they turn around and they go after people for using the system that they said that they should use. Like, shut up. Shut up. And in the meantime, there's a billionaire class that's extracting trillions of dollars of wealth out of the society. Shut up. Like, what are you talking about? It's just the most embarrassing shit of my life. No, it's just, and it's nickel and diming people for nothing. It's just saying to people who are just trying to survive during a very chaotic period. Like, the COVID period was very chaotic. There's a lot of chaos and a lot of uncertainty, and everybody was deeply, deeply emotional during that period of time. And to say to people, hey, we're going to make sure that we get through this and we're going to have, like, a financial aspect of this, and then to turn around and say, like, oh, by the way, we were just joking. Eat it. Like, eat it. Like, get the fuck out of here. What are you talking about? Like, it's just like, what makes you... Nothing else erodes public confidence in your systems than doing this kind of stuff. Like, just on a basic, like... Just like on a basic sense. Just basic sense. Like, telling people, trust us, trust us, trust us, and then betraying people like that. Like, well, they're not going to trust you anymore. It's just stupid. Why are you doing it? Nilo, good to see you, my man. Everybody hates doing the work of a class action lawsuit, but anyone who's won one knows they are worth it usually. Yeah, one of the best tools we have, not to oversell it. June writes, politics streamers get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to play video games and read off Wikipedia articles while sharing their opinions for 8 hours straight. No offense to John, at least his opinions are correct. Well, and I don't play video games. I actually have tried to do that a couple of times, and I hate it. I really do. I hate it. It's not, I just, turning my hobby into a monetization tool. Nah, bro. Nah, I would rather put on stuff like this. Like, walk around videos, see the world, show people what the rest of the world looks like. Look at this part right here. This is beautiful. This is straight beautiful. Oh, man, this is so lovely. Oh, man, walking down this boardwalk would be so lovely. If I was living in Hanoi, if that's where I was born, I would do everything I could to try to live as close to this boardwalk as I possibly could. One of the real benefits, one of the real beautiful things that's happened in my life is that I live like a stone's throw away from the beach here in Toronto. Oh, I love it. I love it. I'm so happy. I'm so happy that I live like that, and that I could just straight up like leave my apartment and just walk down and be at the beach. Every Wednesday I get down to the beach as a guarantee, but this week I was at the beach almost every day, and over the weekend I'm trying to get down to the beach as often as I can. Yeah. John has like 20 viewers, while those with CIA views boost have 200,000. Yeah. Slow and steady wins the race, CH. good opportunity to say like and share and subscribe. Please hit the bells. Please hit the whistles. Please make sure to please consider donating. Please consider donating to my Patreon. You'll find that in the description. Patreon.com/Canadian the Canadian Commie. Please consider donating. Every little bit helps. We are slowly and steadily building. The goal of this channel is to be able to do this 5 days a week and to extend the hours so that we can keep pushing back against the nonsense that is coming out of our society and attempt to actually build a civilization to try to reclaim our country from these goddamn barbarians who are using our tax monies in order to fund genocides overseas, who are doing everything they can to plunge us into poverty and desperation, while simultaneously trying to convince us that it's our fault that we live in poverty. Like, you don't think you'd get burned out doing it 5 days a week? Not if it was my only job, Transylvanian. If it was the only job that I had, like if I didn't also have to do capitalism, if I didn't also have to go do another job, if I didn't also spend a good chunk of my life doing that, which I'm so grateful that I've narrowed that down so it's only 3 days a week now, right? And the hope is that it'll narrow and it'll narrow and it'll narrow, and then eventually I'll just step over, right? That's the conception, right? I'm manifesting that reality. Is that as this grows and as this gets bigger and as this gets larger and as this gets, I can step from the capitalist job to this and just go, oop, and make it clean. And I think it will be possible. I think it will be possible. So I just need to continue making decisions to grow the channel, making decisions to continue spreading the word, making decisions to continue down that path. Nostrum, I don't know what you said here. That's your opinion is one of those things I've gotten tired of hearing. Oh, I see what you're saying. When enough people say it, I see it as a reflective response instead of a valid opinion about my opinion. Yeah, I just don't think... Like, I think people get comfortable in what they consider to be the common knowledge. The issue is that we're living in a period of incredulity, right? We're living in this period of incredulity where the system of capital and certainly the system of the West has lost its credibility. That I feel like it lost its credibility a long time ago, but it's definitely lost its credibility over the Gaza genocide, right? Like, I was of the opinion that this system lost its credibility with the invasion of Iraq. Like, when I was 19, I was like, there's nothing credible about this system. We don't need to listen to any of these guys. We don't need to pay attention. We don't need to invest our time in their systems. Like, and every single time I tried to invest myself in their systems, I got confronted with, all you have to do is lie. All you have to do is believe some bullshit lie, and you can do this, right? All you got to do is buy into a genocide. All you've got to do is buy into the idea that your leadership is good somehow, right? And here's some money for you. Look at all the money that we're willing to give you as long as you're willing to participate in a genocide. And I was just like, no thanks. Not interested in that. Nope. Oh, you wanna get involved in academia, but you want to publish articles that are anti-capitalist? We would prefer that you wouldn't. Our donators don't really want you to do that. Oh, then fuck off. You have no credibility. So, I've been of the opinion that capitalist institutions have had no credibility for most of my life already. And it's like there's just a new generation of people who are beginning to realize that this system has no credibility. And it is taking the millennials a little bit of time, right? Like, I think that I've been ahead of the millennials on this one. But more and more, the election of Donald Trump was a big moment for a lot of people, I think. The election of Donald Trump was a big moment. And I know for myself, like when I was coming up, holding on to this belief that, or this understanding rather, that there was no credibility to be had in this system. There were people who poo-pooed me and ignored me and sent me away. The moment Donald Trump got elected, those very same people started to be like, so, John, what do you think about what's going on? And as I've sharpened my blade, more and more over time, I've been able to articulate that incredulity a lot more succinctly and a lot more sharply. And it's always been obvious to me that the system of capital and this society has no credibility. But the Gaza genocide has basically put the nail in the coffin for an entire generation of people. And so now we're living in a place where there is no credibility. And so every voice counts now. Because even those who are at the highest levels of our society no longer have credibility, it means that a guy who is homeless on the street might actually have a better worldview than the prime minister of my country. It straight up means that a PhD scholar at the University of Toronto might actually be stupider than a guy working at a Walmart. And that's just like a truism. That's just a fact. That there may very well be geniuses, intelligent people working at McDonald's, while the universities are full of complete and total dim-witted dullards. Like, that's the level of incredulity that we have now reached. And that literally everything needs to be taken on a case-by-case basis now. That we have to actually read what these professors are saying. We have to actually read what these politicians are saying. We have to actually see what these bankers are saying so that we can look at them and say, do you have any credibility? And the answer most of the time is no. Because these people have bought into a failed system that results in genocides. And we have no reason whatsoever to tolerate them at all outside of their ability to do violence against us. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of moments, actually. Like, we've got people in the chat being like, the system lost credibility with the Native American genocide. Yeah. Taking a long time to catch up with that. The system lost credibility with the outbreak of World War I. Certainly the Dadaists thought so. Right? Dadaism was a result of World War I. And Dadaism, for those of you who don't know, Dadaism was an artistic movement that occurred post-World War I that popped up in Europe that essentially said, if the outcome of our culture is World War I, then our culture has no credibility, and we need to cleanse our culture artistically. And we are going to do that through absurdism. That we're going to render anything that this culture considers sacred, we are going to make fun of it and lampoon it. To get a good conception of what Dadaist art looks like, you just need to watch Monty Python. And any of the cartoons in Monty Python are explicitly Dadaist. Just absurdism for the sake of absurdism, with no overriding point. Right? Like, you're not trying to do satire. You're not trying to make an analogy. You're not trying to make a point. You're just trying to take the Queen of England and have her shit out a baby, and then have her lift up the baby who is made of shit and give the shit baby all of the kisses and cover shit all over her face. That's it. It's just absurdism for the sake of absurdism. And it's taking things that were once considered sacred, such as the Queen of England or the Pope, and rendering them absurd and pointing out their absurdity and making them look foolish. Because in the view of the Dadaists, they are foolish because they allowed World War I to occur. Like, and I think that we could do for a great deal of Dadaism at this point. But the trouble with doing Dadaism at this point is that society is a parody of itself now. Like, Donald Trump is a Dadaist figure. Donald Trump is an absurdist figure. The society is already absurdism for absurdist's sake. Although there are movements. If you do a search for, if you go on TikTok and search core, core, you'll find stuff that is explicitly Dadaist in its expression. Lots of punk is Dadaist. Yeah, absurdism for the sake of absurdism, and through that, you attempt to cleanse the society, so that so that nothing remains. And one of the great Dadaist expressions was a Dadaist artist was commissioned to install something in a gallery, and he showed up with a urinal, and he installed the urinal. And he looked at everybody who kind of looked at him like, "What are you doing? This is crazy." And he said, "Explain to me why that's not art." Somebody had to make it. Somebody crafted it. Somebody designed it. Somebody thought about it. It has an aesthetic value. Explain to me why a urinal isn't art. And in so doing, he straight up took the piss out of the entire art world and took a look at their pretension and said to them, all of your pretension is pointless. A toilet has as much artistic credibility as anything else in this place. Would Has be a Dadaist? I mean, he is a bit incomprehensible. It's true. A little bit word salady is how I would put it. I will say this of Has, he seems quite dedicated. You can't knock his dedication. I think of that crew of patriotic socialists, Pat Socks. I think he's the useful idiot. He's just the guy that had a bit of a following and then got connected to actual feds like Jackson Hickle, or whatever his fucking name was, and he just kind of is useful to them. I don't think he's actually like I don't really get what he thinks, because I don't think he gets what he thinks. Well, I think that we've reached the end of this one, guys. We're past 9 o'clock. Yeah, mega communism, just like... What is mega communism except a Dadaist, absurdist expression? Right? Like... Let's take two completely incompatible ideologies and attempt to merge them. Good luck with that. Alright, guys. Always remember, each and every one of you is a quantum being walking around in quantum energy. These billionaires are spending hundreds of billions of dollars in the hopes you'll never realize it. You'll just stay the good little commodity they need you to be. Revolt. Rebel. Repent. Good luck. We're going to need it.